Hello guys, welcome to Percy Jackson. So in this video, we will see, what if Percy read the Naruto got the power of omnitrix? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Scroll of Nine Realms. The sunlight danced across the surface of Long Island Sound, creating a dazzling pattern that shifted with each gentle wave. Below the surface, Percy Jackson propelled himself through the cool blue water with practiced ease. At 18, his connection to the sea had only grown stronger. Water parted around him like an old friend, the pressure barely registering as he descended deeper. Just a routine check, they said. Percy muttered to himself, bubbles escaping his lips and rising toward the surface. Nothing dangerous, they said. 3 days ago, Chiron had called Percy into the big house with concerns about unusual energy readings coming from an underwater cave system not far from Camp Half-Blood. Normally, such tasks would be handled by the camp's regular patrols, but these dings had a distinct magical signature that concerned the old centaur enough to send Percy specifically. The cave entrance loomed before him, a dark mouth in the underwater cliff face. Percy summoned a small orb of water and willed it to glow, a trick he'd perfected over the years. The luminescent sphere floated ahead, casting eerie blue light as he swam into the darkness. The narrow passage widened into a larger chamber, portions of which rose above the waterline. Percy surfaced, finding himself in a cavern with walls that seemed to shimmer with faint blue-green light. He pulled himself onto a rocky ledge and scanned his surroundings. Okay, definitely not natural, he said, examining the perfectly smooth sections of wall interspersed with rough natural stone. Ancient symbols were carved into the smooth surfaces, reminiscent of Greek but with elements Percy didn't recognize. His hand instinctively moved to his pocket where Riptide, his magical pen sword, waited. The familiar weight was reassuring as he ventured deeper into the dry portion of the cave. A faint pulsing light drew him forward. At the back of the cavern, nestled in a small alcove, sat an object that made Percy's skin tingle with warning. A scroll, bound in what appeared to be dark blue leather with silver clasps, emanated soft pulses of blue-green energy. I'm guessing this is what's causing those readings, Percy said, approaching cautiously. Years of demigod experience had taught him that glowing objects were rarely good news. The scroll didn't look particularly threatening, but appearances were deceiving in his world. Percy crouched down for a closer look without touching it. Strange markings covered the leather binding, symbols that seemed to shift between Greek letters and something else entirely. Annabeth would know what to make of this, he muttered. After a moment's hesitation, Percy reached out. The instant his fingers touched the scroll, the blue-green light intensified. Energy coursed up his arm. Not painful but unnervingly foreign. The scroll's clasp snapped open of its own accord. That's probably bad, Percy said, but curiosity overrode caution. He carefully unrolled the first few inches of parchment. Inside were more of the strange shifting symbols, but as he looked at them, they seemed to rearrange themselves into ancient Greek, though the translation felt imperfect, as if filtering through multiple languages. Bound between worlds, 9 powers await the worthy vessel, Percy read aloud. Guardians of the realms stand vigilant against the shadow that devours. The seal weakens with each passing cycle. The words seemed to lift off the page, swirling around him in strands of blue-green light. They coalesced around his left wrist, forming what looked like a watch with a circular face divided into 9 sections, each with a different symbol. The device wasn't metal or plastic but seemed made of the same energy that had emanated from the scroll. Okay, definitely bad, Percy said, trying to remove the watch. It wouldn't budge. Chiron is going to kill me. The cave suddenly trembled, dust and small rocks falling from the ceiling. Percy quickly rolled the scroll back up and stuffed it into his backpack. Whatever was happening, leaving this thing behind seemed unwise. He dove back into the water, propelling himself through the underwater passage with urgency. As he burst out into open water, a massive shadow passed overhead, something large moving toward the shore. Toward camp, Percy shot to the surface, breaking through the waves to see a monstrous shape in the sky, not a conventional Greek monster, but something that looked like a massive serpent with feathered wings. Its body seemed to shimmer at the edges, as if not fully in this dimension. And now I get to explain how I found a magic scroll. Got a weird watch stuck to my wrist, and brought a flying snake monster to camp, Percy groaned. Perfect. He willed the currents to propel him toward shore at breakneck speed. Riding the water like a supersonic jet. The strange watch on his wrist pulsed with energy in response to his powers, amplifying his control of the water unexpectedly. Percy shot forward, with such acceleration that he nearly lost control, rocketing onto the beach in an ungraceful tumble. Percy. Annabeth was running down from the dunes, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. Our stormy gray eyes fixed on the sky behind him. A few other campers followed, weapons drawn. What is that thing? She demanded, helping him to his feet. No idea, Percy said, drawing Riptide and uncapping it. The pen transformed into a gleaming celestial bronze sword. But it followed me from an underwater cave. Annabeth's eyes narrowed as she noticed the device on his wrist. And what's that? Also from the cave. It's stuck. Percy raised his sword as the flying serpent circled lower. I'll explain later, if we survive this. The creature let out a shrieking roar that made several younger campers cover their ears. It circled the beach once more before diving straight toward them. Scatter, Percy shouted. Campers moved in practiced formations, archers taking position while others readied spears and swords. Percy and Annabeth stood their ground as the serpent approached. The monster was even more bizarre up close. Its scales shifted colors like oil on water, and its eyes glowed with the same blue-green energy as the scroll and watch. It opened its jaws wide, revealing rows of teeth that seemed to phase in and out of reality. Percy lunged forward, Riptide slicing through the air, only to pass through the creature as if it were mist. The serpent's tail whipped around, solidifying just in time to slam into Percy and send him flying backward. It can control its tangibility, Annabeth shouted, dodging a strike from the serpent's head. Percy scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. If physical attacks passed through it when it chose, how could they fight it? The watch on his wrist pulsed more intensely, almost painfully. As the serpent lunged toward a group of younger campers, Percy instinctively raised his arm. The watch's face rotated, one of the 9 sections lighting up brilliantly. Knowledge flooded Percy's mind. Not words or instructions, but pure instinct. He pressed his palm against the glowing section, and energy enveloped his body. The transformation was instantaneous. Power coursed through him, different from his usual connection to the sea but somehow familiar. When the energy faded, Percy felt changed. Water droplets hung suspended in the air around him, responding to his mere presence. His senses were sharper, his awareness of moisture in the air and ground amplified 100-fold. Percy. Annabeth's voice broke through his momentary disorientation. Percy looked down at himself. His camp half-blood t-shirt and jeans had been replaced by a light blue and silver outfit reminiscent of armor but more flexible. Symbols like those from the scroll adorned the fabric, glowing faintly. His skin had a subtle blue tint, and when he reached up to touch his face, he felt markings around his eyes. "I'm okay," he said, his voice carrying a strange resonance. Better than okay. The serpent creature seemed to recognize the transformation. It recoiled, hissing loudly before launching itself at Percy with renewed aggression. This time, Percy didn't try to use his sword. Instead, he extended his hand toward the ocean. Water responded with unprecedented force, a massive wave rising at his command. But unlike his usual powers, the water took shape, forming into dozens of spears that surrounded the serpent. "You can't become intangible everywhere at once," Percy said, somehow knowing this was true. He clenched his fist, and the water spears attacked from all directions. The serpent tried to phase through them, but Percy could now sense where it was solid and where it wasn't, adjusting his attack accordingly. Several spears found their mark, drawing unearthly shrieks from the creature. The serpent retreated higher into the air, its form flickering more erratically now. "What did you do to it?" Annabeth asked, moving to stand beside him. "I don't know exactly," Percy admitted. "But I can sense it somehow, like I can feel where it exists in our dimension." The serpent circled once more, then let out a final shriek before its body seemed to tear open the air itself. Creating a swirling portal, it slipped through, and the rift sealed behind it. As the immediate danger passed, Percy became aware of dozens of eyes fixed on him. The entire camp had gathered on the beach, staring at his transformed appearance with expressions ranging from awe to concern. Chiron trotted forward, his tail flicking nervously. "Percy, I think you'd better tell us what happened in that cave." Before Percy could respond, the energy of the transformation began to fade. Blue light enveloped him again, and moments later he stood in his normal clothes, the strange watch still firmly attached to his wrist. "It's a long story," Percy said, suddenly feeling exhausted. The rec room of the big house had never felt so crowded. Senior counselors from each cabin sat around the ping-pong table, with Chiron at the head. Percy had placed the scroll in the center of the table, where it continued to emit a faint glow. "So this just attached itself to you?" Clarice LaRue, daughter of Ares, looked skeptically at the watch-like device on Percy's wrist. "Pretty much," Percy confirmed. "I touched the scroll, it opened, I read a few lines, and then," he gestured to his wrist, "permanent jewelry." "And it let you transform," Annabeth said. She hadn't stopped examining the device since they'd arrived at the big house. "Into what exactly?" Percy shrugged. "It felt like I was more connected to water than ever before. Not just controlling it, but understanding it at some fundamental level. And I could sense that creatures. I don't know, its reality pattern. The scroll contains some characters I recognize from ancient Eastern texts," Annabeth said, carefully examining it without touching. "Mixed with Greek, and something else entirely. It's it's written in multiple languages simultaneously." Chiron leaned forward, his expression grave. "Percy, did anything happen when you transformed back? Any sensations or visions?" Percy thought for a moment. "I saw something, just for an instant. A massive gate or door with 9 symbols, the same ones that are on this watch thing. One of the symbols was glowing, the same one that lit up when I transformed." "And the creature?" Chiron pressed. "You said it seemed to recognize your transformed state." "It definitely reacted to it," Percy confirmed. "Like it was afraid, or angry. Or both." Il Solace from the Apollo cabin spoke up. "Has anyone else noticed that watch has the same number of sections as the symbols Percy mentioned?" 9 realms, Percy recalled from the scroll's text. "Bound between worlds. 9 powers await the worthy vessel." A tense silence fell over the room. Finally, Chiron sighed heavily. "I believe what you've found, Percy, is an artifact not of Greek origin, or at least, not entirely. There are legends in multiple mythologies about objects that bridge different realms of existence. Like Yggdrasil in Norse mythology," Annabeth suggested. "Similar concept." "Yes," Chiron nodded. "But this appears to draw from Eastern traditions as well. The transformation you experienced, the attire, the markings, they resemble ancient descriptions of mystical warriors from Japanese and Chinese legends." "So I turned into some kind of mystical ninja?" Percy asked incredulously. "That's one way of putting it," Chiron said with the faintest hint of amusement. "More accurately, I believe this device allows you to channel powers from different mythological paradigms, different realms of divine influence." "Great," Percy muttered, as if being a Greek demigod wasn't complicated enough. Clarice snorted. "Only you, Jackson, would accidentally bind yourself to some interdimensional power watch." "The question is," Annabeth interjected, "what do we do about it? And what was that creature that attacked us?" Chiron stroked his beard thoughtfully. "I suspect the creature was a guardian or sentry, something that detected the scroll's activation. As for what to do," he fixed Percy with a serious gaze. "I'm afraid we may not have many options. Magical bindings like this are notoriously difficult to break, especially when they involve artifacts of unknown origin. So I'm stuck with it," Percy concluded, looking down at the device. Its surface had settled into a dormant state, the symbols barely visible now. "For the time being, yes," Chiron confirmed. "But perhaps we can learn to use it to our advantage." "Percy, you said you sensed other symbols or forms beyond the one you accessed." Percy nodded. 8 others, I think. Each with a different signature, I guess. The one I used felt like water, but different from my usual powers. Then perhaps with training, you could learn to access and control the others," Chiron suggested. Guys. Nnor Stoll from the Hermes cabin had been unusually quiet during the meeting. Now he pointed to the scroll on the table, Is it supposed to be doing that? The scroll had begun to unroll itself, the parchment extending slowly as if pulled by invisible hands. More symbols appeared, glowing briefly before settling into a form that, while still strange, was now readable as ancient Greek. Annabeth leaned forward, carefully reading without touching. It's changing, adapting to our language more completely. She frowned as she translated. The worthy vessel bridges the gap between realms. The unworthy vessel widens it. That doesn't sound good, Percy said. There's more, Annabeth continued. The guardians of dimension will seek the vessel to protect the seal. The shadow grows with each transformation, testing the boundaries of its prison. Prison, Percy repeated uneasily. What shadow? As if in response to his question, the scroll suddenly rolled itself up again, the clasp snapping shut with an ominous click. I believe, Chiron said gravely, that we may have a more serious situation than we initially thought. If I'm interpreting this correctly, the scroll and device are connected to some kind of seal, a magical prison containing something dangerous. And let me guess, Percy said, by activating this thing, I might have weakened the seal. Chiron's silence was answer enough. Perfect, Percy sighed. So now what? Now, Chiron said, we prepare. If this shadow is indeed trying to escape its prison, and if these guardians of dimension are coming to find you, we need to be ready for both. I'll start researching interdimensional seals and barriers, Annabeth volunteered. There might be something in Daedalus's laptop. And I, Percy said, looking down at the device on his wrist. Should probably figure out how this thing works before more flying serpents show up. Percy stood alone on the beach, the waves lapping gently at his feet. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the sand. He'd spent hours trying to activate the device again, with limited success. Once, he'd managed to make the same symbol glow briefly, but the transformation hadn't triggered. You're thinking too hard, came Annabeth's voice from behind him. Percy turned to see her approaching, a thick book tucked under one arm. Find anything useful? Maybe, she said, stopping beside him. Ancient texts mention warriors who could channel elemental energy through their life force, what some cultures called Kai or chakra. Chakra, Percy repeated. The word seemed to make the device on his wrist pulse faintly. That feels right somehow. The scroll called you a vessel, Annabeth continued. I think it means you're channeling these powers rather than generating them yourself. Percy looked out at the ocean, feeling its familiar pull. When I transformed, it felt like my connection to water was expanded. Enhanced. Like I was tapping into some greater source of water power. Try again, Annabeth encouraged. But don't force it. From what I've read, chakra responds to intention and harmony, not brute force. Percy closed his eyes, focusing on the device. Rather than trying to activate it directly, he concentrated on his connection to water, the feeling of currents moving around him, the taste of salt in the air, the rhythm of the tides pulling at his awareness. The device warmed against his skin. When Percy opened his eyes, the water symbol was glowing brightly. That's it, Annabeth breathed. Percy pressed his palm against the symbol, and the transformation washed over him again. The rush of energy, the heightened awareness, the strange blue-tinged appearance and unfamiliar clothing. It worked, he exclaimed, his voice carrying that same unusual resonance. Annabeth circled him, examining his transformed state with undisguised fascination. The markings around your eyes look like waves, she noted. And the symbols on your clothes, they're not just decorative. They form sentences in that merged language from the scroll. Percy looked down at his hands. They appeared normal except for the faint blue tinge to his skin and glowing lines that traced from his wrists up his arms, disappearing beneath his sleeves. Let's see what this form can really do, he said, stepping toward the water. The moment his foot touched the surf, Percy felt a urge of power unlike anything he'd experienced before. The ocean responded to him with extraordinary sensitivity. With barely a thought, he raised a column of water, shaping it into a perfect sphere that hovered at eye level. That's new, Annabeth commented. Percy concentrated, and the sphere divided into dozens of smaller orbs that orbited around them like tiny planets. Each moved independently, following the patterns he visualized in his mind. It's like the water has become an extension of my thoughts, Percy explained. Before, I had to push or pull it. Now, it just follows my intention. He sent the water orbs skating across the surface of the ocean, where they bounced like skipping stones before reforming into a wave that swept back to shore. Try something else, Annabeth suggested. You said you could sense that creature's tangibility. What else can you sense? Percy closed his eyes, extending his awareness beyond the immediate surroundings. He could feel the water in everything, the moisture in the air, the groundwater beneath the sand, the blood flowing through Annabeth's veins. I can sense life, he said with wonder. Water connects everything living. I can feel the fish in the bay, the nymphs in the forest, even the sap moving in the trees. He opened his eyes, turning toward camp. And I can sense something else. Something wrong. Without waiting for Annabeth's response, Percy sprinted up the beach, moving with supernatural speed. Water molecules in the air seemed to part before him, reducing resistance and propelling him forward. Annabeth followed as quickly as she could, but couldn't match his enhanced pace. Percy reached the crest of Half-Blood Hill in seconds, skidding to a stop beside Talia's pine tree. From this vantage point, he could see dark figures moving through the woods beyond the camp's boundaries, humanoid shapes that seemed to flicker at the edges, similar to how the serpent creature had appeared. Intruders, he muttered, just as Annabeth caught up, breathing hard. Where? She asked, scanning the trees. There, Percy pointed. 3 of them, moving toward the camp border. Annabeth squinted. I don't see. Wait. Her eyes widened as one of the figures stepped into a clearing, momentarily visible in the fading light. What is that? The figure was humanoid but clearly not human. It wore close-fitting dark clothing with armor plates that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. A mask covered its face, marked with symbols similar to those on the scroll. Most disturbing was the way it moved, flickering in and out of full visibility, as if not entirely present in their reality. I'm guessing those are the Guardians the scroll mentioned, Percy said grimly. They don't look very friendly, Annabeth noted, drawing her celestial bronze dagger. Go warn Chiron, Percy said. I'll try to slow them down. Percy, I've got this, he assured her, the blue markings on his skin glowing brighter. This form seems designed to fight them. I can sense their fluctuations, or whatever you'd call it. Annabeth hesitated, then nodded. Be careful, we don't know what they're capable of. As she raced back toward the big house, Percy turned to face the approaching figures. They had spotted him now, their movements becoming more purposeful as they converged on his position. Percy reached out with his enhanced senses, feeling for water sources he could use. The creek that ran through camp was too far, but there was moisture in the ground and air. He pulled it together, forming a swirling barrier of water around himself. The first Guardian reached the boundary of camp, and passed through it as if the magical barriers didn't exist. That's not good, Percy muttered. The Guardian raised its hand, revealing a device on its wrist similar to Percy's but darker in color. It pressed a symbol, and its form shifted, becoming more solid as it was enveloped in reddish energy. When the transformation completed, the Guardian's appearance had changed. Its armor now featured flame-like patterns, and heat radiated from its body. Definitely not good, Percy amended. The Guardian thrust its palm forward, and a stream of fire erupted toward Percy. He countered with a wall of water, creating a hissing cloud of steam as the attacks collided. The other 2 Guardians had reached the hill now, flanking Percy on either side. One transformed in a flash of brown light, its body taking on a stone-like appearance. The other remained in its original form but drew what looked like a short sword made of shimmering energy. 3 against 1, Percy said, gathering more water around him. I've had worse odds. The Fire Guardian attacked again, this time creating a ring of flames that circled Percy, attempting to cut off his retreat. The Earth Guardian stomped its foot, and the ground beneath Percy rumbled and cracked. Percy leapt upward, propelled by a geyser of water that carried him over the fire ring. In midair, he shaped the water into dozens of sharp icicles and sent them hurtling toward his attackers. The Guardians moved with inhuman speed, dodging or deflecting most of the projectiles. The Fire Guardian melted several before they could reach it, while the Earth Guardian simply allowed them to shatter against its stone skin. The third Guardian, however, was caught by surprise. An icicle pierced its shoulder, drawing a strange hissing sound that might have been pain. The injured guardian flickered more erratically, its form becoming partially transparent before solidifying again. "So you can be hurt," Percy noted, landing in a crouch. "Good to know." The fire guardian made a series of gestures, and flames coalesced into a massive fiery serpent that lunged toward Percy. He rolled aside, barely avoiding its jaws, and countered by pulling moisture from the ground to form a water dragon of his own. The two elemental constructs clashed in a spectacular display of steam and energy. Percy could feel the strain of maintaining such a complex water shape, but the power flowing through his transformed state seemed inexhaustible. From the corner of his eye, Percy saw movement, campers rushing to his aid. Led by Clarice with her electric spear and the Apollo cabin's archers. Annabeth and Chiron were close behind. The Guardians noticed the reinforcements too. They exchanged what appeared to be hand signals. Then the Fire Guardian made a slashing motion in the air. Reality seemed to tear, creating a small rift similar to what the serpent had escaped through. "They're trying to retreat," Percy shouted. He couldn't let them go, not without answers. Concentrating intensely, Percy gathered all the water he could command and formed it into a massive hand. The construct shot forward, grabbing the inured guardian before it could reach the rift. The other two hesitated, looking back at their captured comrade. Percy brought the trapped guardian closer, maintaining his watery grip despite its struggles. "Why are you attacking us?" he demanded. The guardian stopped struggling, its masked face turning toward Percy. When it spoke, its voice had the same strange resonance as Percy's transformed voice. "Vessel," it said, the word seeming to translate itself in Percy's mind. "You have taken what is not yours to claim." The seal weakens. The shadow stirs. "What seal?" Percy pressed. "What shadow?" "Return the chakra seal," the guardian continued, gesturing to Percy's wrist. "Before the boundaries fall." The other two guardians suddenly leapt through the rift. Before Percy could react, the trapped guardian flickered more intensely, its form becoming almost completely transparent. It slipped through Percy's water construct as if turning to mist, then dashed toward the closing rift. Percy lunged after it, but too late. The rift sealed with a flash of energy, leaving no trace of the guardians. The transformation began to fade, blue energy dissipating from Percy's body. By the time Annabeth and the others reached him, he was back in his normal clothes, feeling unexpectedly drained. "Are you okay?" Annabeth asked, kneeling beside him. "Yeah," Percy managed, though his limbs felt like lead. "Just tired." Chiron approached, his expression grave. "Did they say anything?" "They called this the chakra seal," Percy said, holding up his wrist. "They want it back. Something about a seal weakening and a shadow stirring." "Chakra," Chiron repeated thoughtfully. "Life energy in several Eastern traditions. It seems our theory about the device's origins was correct. They passed right through the camp's magical boundaries." Percy added, "Like they weren't even there. Interdimensional beings would not be bound by our protections," Chiron explained. "Our barriers are designed to keep out threats from our world, not from elsewhere." Clarice planted her spear in the ground with a frustrated gesture. "So we're vulnerable to these guardian things." "Great. Not entirely," Chiron said. "They seemed quite concerned about Percy's possession of the device. That gives us leverage, and time to prepare. And they can be fought," Percy added. "I managed to injure one of them. But they'll be back," Annabeth said. It wasn't a question. Percy nodded, looking down at the device on his wrist, the chakra seal, as the guardian had called it. The 9 symbols were barely visible now, but he could feel them waiting. Each representing a different power, a different transformation. "They'll be back," he agreed. "And next time, they'll bring more than 3. That night, Percy dreamed. He stood before a massive gate made of what appeared to be solid darkness. 9 symbols were carved into its surface, the same symbols as on the chakra seal. One glowed with blue light, pulsing gently. As Percy watched, hairline fractures appeared around the glowing symbol, spreading outward like a spiderweb. Dark mist seeped through the cracks, coalescing into a vaguely humanoid shape. "Vessel," the shape said, its voice like grinding stone. At last, Percy tried to back away, but found himself unable to move. "Who are you?" he demanded. The shape laughed, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I am what waits beyond. I am what hungers for freedom." The shadow, Percy realized. You're what the seal is imprisoning. Such a limited term. Shadow, the entity said dismissively. I am much more, and much less. I am possibility unrealized, potential unfulfilled. What do you want? The shape moved closer, the mist becoming more defined, suggesting a tall figure with broad shoulders and features that shifted constantly. To exist, it said simply. To be more than a prisoner of possibility. Each time you use the seal, vessel, you test my boundaries. Each transformation weakens the walls between. Percy looked at the gate, noticing how the cracks had spread further. The Guardians want the seal back to stop you from escaping. The Guardians fear what they cannot control, the entity said. Contempt evident in its voice. They do not understand that boundaries are meant to be transcended. And if these boundaries fall? Percy asked. What happens then? The misty figure seemed to smile. Though it had no fixed face. Then all realms become one. All possibilities exist simultaneously. Chaos and order, indistinguishable from each other. That sounds bad, Percy said. Only to those who fear change, the entity replied. You, vessel, you have already begun to embrace it. The power of water from one realm, filtered through another, wielded in a third. A perfect conduit. The gate trembled, more cracks appearing. The blue glow of the water symbol flared brighter. Then two other symbols began to illuminate, one a deep green, the other a shadowy purple. 3 of 9, the entity said. Satisfaction evident in its voice. The process accelerates. Percy felt a pulling sensation, as if something were tugging at his very essence. He looked down, to see the chakra seal on his wrist glowing in response to the symbols on the gate. What are you doing? He demanded, trying to resist the pull. Merely helping you realize your potential, vessel, the entity said. 3 forms await you now. Soon, all 9 will be yours, and the gate will fall. Percy tried to wake himself, to break free of the dream, but the entity's influence was too strong. Do not fight it, the misty figure urged. Embrace the power. Become what you were meant to be. I'm not your vessel, Percy insisted. I'm not going to help you escape. The entity laughed again. You already have, Percy Jackson. The process began the moment you touched the scroll. It cannot be stopped, only guided. The pulling sensation intensified, and Percy felt knowledge flooding his mind. How to access the other 2 transformations, how to use their unique abilities. Despite his resistance, the information burned itself into his consciousness. The Shadow Hunter and the Earth Colossus, the entity said. Use them wisely, vessel. Each transformation brings me closer to freedom. With a final surge of willpower, Percy tore himself away from the entity's influence. The dream shattered around him. The gate and misty figure dissolving into darkness. Percy woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in his bunk in the Poseidon cabin. Sweat soaked his t-shirt, and the chakra seal glowed faintly on his wrist. 3 of its 9 symbols illuminated briefly before fading back to dormancy. 3 of 9, Percy whispered, echoing the entity's words. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he see. Old now access 2 more transformations beyond the water form he'd already used. The knowledge was simply there in his mind, as if it had always been. The Shadow Hunter, stealth, darkness manipulation, enhanced reflexes. The Earth Colossus, super strength, durability, earth manipulation. And with each transformation, the mysterious shadow would grow stronger, the seal containing it weaker. Percy looked out his cabin window at the moonlit camp. Everything seemed peaceful now, but he knew it wouldn't last. The Guardians would return, and the entity behind the gate would continue to influence him through the chakra seal. He was caught between forces he barely understood, with power he hadn't asked for and consequences he couldn't fully comprehend. Just another Tuesday, Percy muttered, falling back onto his pillow. But even as exhaustion pulled him back toward sleep, Percy knew this was different from his previous adventures. This wasn't about Greek gods or monsters or titans. This was something else entirely, something that transcended the boundaries of his world. And somehow, he had become the key to either preserving those boundaries or destroying them completely. Morning arrived too quickly. Percy had managed a few more hours of fitful sleep, thankfully without dreams of misty entities or cracking gates. He showered and dressed quickly, aware that Chiron had called an emergency council meeting for first light. As he headed toward the big house, Percy was acutely conscious of the stares from other campers. Word had spread about his transformation and the attack by the Guardians. Some looked at him with awe, others with uncertainty or even fear. He couldn't blame them. He was a bit afraid himself. Percy. He turned to see Annabeth jogging to catch up with him, a leather-bound book tucked under her arm. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she'd gotten even less sleep than he had. "You look terrible," he commented. "Thanks," she replied dryly. "I was up most of the night researching. Found some interesting connections." They walked together toward the big house, their pace slowing as Annabeth opened the book. "So the symbols on your chakra seal. I found Semal AR markings in ancient texts from multiple cultures." She pointed to illustrations in the book. Circular designs from Japanese manuscripts, energy diagrams from Chinese scrolls, mystical symbols from Indian temples. "They all represent different forms of life energy or elemental power," she explained. "What's fascinating is how similar the concepts are across cultures that supposedly had little contact with each other. Almost like they were all describing the same thing from different perspectives," Percy suggested. Annabeth nodded. "Exactly. And get this, in every tradition, the number 9 appears repeatedly. 9 elemental forms, 9 celestial bodies, 9 levels of consciousness. 9 realms," Percy added, thinking of the scroll's text. "Right. The idea of 9 separate but connect. domains of existence appears across mythologies. Norse had 9 worlds connected by Yggdrasil. Hinduism describes 9 forms of the divine feminine. Even in Greek tradition, there were 9 muses presenting different aspects of knowledge and creativity." Percy glanced down at the chakra seal. "So this thing lets me tap into powers from different, what? Dimensions. Mythologies." "That's my theory," Annabeth confirmed. "The scroll called you a vessel. I think you're channeling energy from these different realms through the seal." Percy hesitated, then told her about his dream, the gate with 9 symbols. The misty entity that called itself, possibility unrealized, and the knowledge of 2 new transformations now fixed in his mind. Annabeth's expression grew increasingly troubled as he spoke. By the time he finished, they had reached the porch of the big house, but she held him back before he could enter. "Percy, this is serious," she said quietly. "If this shadow is using your transformations to weaken some interdimensional barrier." "I know," Percy said. "But what choice do I have? I can't remove the seal, and those guardians aren't exactly asking nicely for it back. If more of them attack, I'll need these powers to defend the camp. But what if using them is exactly what this entity wants?" Percy had no answer for that. Before he could try to formulate one, the door to the big house opened. And Chiron beckoned them inside. "Good, you're here," the centaur said. "We have much to discuss." The rec room was already filled with senior counselors, plus a few others. Chiron had specifically invited Nico D'Angelo, who had arrived shortly after the Guardian attack, Rachel Elizabeth Dare, the camp's oracle, and, surprisingly, Grover Underwood, Percy's satyr friend W. Ho had been away on council of Cloven Elder's business. "Grover," Percy exclaimed, momentarily forgetting his troubles as he embraced his old friend. "When did you get back?" "Last night," Grover replied, his expression unusually serious. "The nature spirits are restless, Percy. They sense disturbances in the fabric of reality. When Chiron told me what happened to you, I came straight away." Disturbances extend beyond Camp Half-Blood, Chiron explained, moving to the head of the ping-pong table. "Reports have come in from satyrs across the country, strange weather patterns, mythological creatures appearing where they shouldn't be, mortals experiencing brief glimpses of other realities." "It's happening already," Annabeth murmured. "The weakening of boundaries between realms." Percy explained his dream to the group, along with Annabeth's theories about the 9 realms and the chakra seal. As he spoke, he noticed Rachel watching him intently, her green eyes slightly unfocused as if seeing something beyond his physical form. "There's more," Chiron said when Percy had finished. "Our Roman friends at Camp Jupiter have reported similar phenomena. Reyna has sent a delegation, who should arrive by this afternoon." "Great," Percy muttered, "because dealing with one mythological paradigm isn't complicated enough." "Actually," Annabeth said thoughtfully, "the Romans might provide valuable insight. Their entire existence represents a different interpretation of the same divine forces we know as Greek. They're essentially a parallel mythological realm that overlaps with ours. A useful perspective, indeed. Chiron agreed. Now, Percy, you mentioned gaining knowledge of 2 additional transformations. Percy nodded. The Shadow Hunter and the Earth Colossus. I know how to access them now, but you're concerned about the consequences, Chiron finished for him. If each transformation weakens the seal holding back this shadow entity. Percy trailed off. Yet I need those powers to defend against the Guardians, Clarice pointed out pragmatically. We can't just sit around waiting to be attacked. I agree, Chiron said. Which is why I propose controlled testing. Percy should attempt these new transformations under supervision, so we can better understand their capabilities and limitations. And their effect on the interdimensional seal, Annabeth added. Percy looked down at the chakra seal. The thought of deliberately using it, potentially helping the shadow entity escape, made him uneasy. But Clarice was right, they couldn't defend themselves against the Guardians without understanding what they were dealing with. All right, he agreed reluctantly. Where do we start? The arena, Chiron decided. After breakfast, we'll begin with what you've already mastered, the water form, and proceed cautiously from there. As the meeting adjourned, Rachel approached Percy, her expression troubled. I've been having fragments, she said quietly. Not full prophecies, just flashes. I think the Oracle is having trouble seeing clearly with all these dimensional disturbances. What kind of flashes? Percy asked. 9 becoming 1. A shadow taking form. A choice between vessels. Rachel shook her head in frustration. None of it makes complete sense yet. A choice between vessels, Percy repeated. Could that mean there's someone else who could use the chakra seal? Someone besides me, maybe, Rachel said, or it could mean something else entirely. That's the problem with fragments, they're open to interpretation. Percy looked down at the device on his wrist. Its symbols dormant but somehow expectant, as if waiting for him to call upon their power again. Let's hope we figure it out before the shadow does, he said. The arena was empty save for Percy, Annabeth, Chiron, and a few select others who might provide useful insights. Nico with his knowledge of shadows, Grover with his connection to nature, and Will Solace with his healing abilities in case something went wrong. Percy stood in the center of the sand-covered floor, the morning sun casting long shadows from the surrounding columns. He closed his eyes, focusing on the chakra seal on his wrist. Start with what you know, Chiron advised. The water form. Percy nodded, concentrating on his connection to water, the feeling of currents, the taste of salt, the rhythm of tides. The seal responded immediately, the water symbol lighting up with blue energy. The transformation washed over him in a wave of power, leaving him in the blue-tinged form with wave-like markings around his eyes and glowing symbols on his clothing. Good, Chiron said, circling him slowly. Now, what can you tell us about this form that you didn't mention before? Percy considered the question, exploring his transformed state more deliberately than he had during the battle with the Guardians. It's called the Water Sage, he said, the knowledge simply there in his mind. It doesn't Saint enhance my existing water powers, it gives me a deeper understanding of water itself. I can sense it everywhere, in everything living. He demonstrated by gesturing toward a pitcher of water that Annabeth had brought. The liquid rose from the container, forming complex patterns in the air before separating into its component parts, pure water, minerals, and other trace elements, each orbiting independently. I can purify water, combine it with other elements, even use it to heal minor injuries, Percy continued, allowing the water to recombine and return to the pitcher. That's incredible, Will said. Can you demonstrate the healing? Percy nodded, approaching Will. Give me your hand. Will extended his palm, which had a small cut from archery practice earlier that morning. Percy drew a tiny amount of water from the air, forming it into a glowing sphere that he pressed gently against the wound. The water seemed to merge with Will's skin, the cut closing as they watched. It feels cool and warm at the same time, Will said with wonder, and it doesn't just heal the surface, I can feel it working deeper, soothing the tissue. There's something else, Percy said, closing his eyes. This form lets me sense disruptions, areas where reality seems thinner or distorted. Like where the guardians appeared? Annabeth asked. Percy nodded. And where that serpent creature escaped? It's like I can feel weak points between dimensions. That could be extremely useful, Chiron noted. Now, let's try one of the new transformations. Which feels more controllable to you? Percy considered for a moment. The knowledge of both new forms was clear in his mind, but one seemed more straightforward, less volatile. The Earth Colossus, he decided. It feels more solid. He allowed the Water Sage transformation to fade, returning to his normal appearance. The process left him slightly tired but not exhausted as it had the first time. Practice, it seemed, made the transition smoother. Percy focused on the deep green symbol on the chakra seal, concentrating on the feeling of earth beneath his feet, the strength of stone, the steadiness of mountains. The symbol responded, glowing with emerald light. The transformation was different this time, heavier, more forceful. Power surged through him like molten rock, hardening his skin and strengthening his muscles. When it finished, Percy stood taller and broader. His skin now with a subtle green-brown tinge and angular markings like mountain ranges around his eyes. His clothing had transformed into armor-like material in earthen tones, with symbols similar to but distinct from those of the Water Sage form. Whoa, Grover bleated nervously. You feel different, like a mountain walking. Percy looked down at his hands, which now appeared more like weathered stone than flesh. He felt immensely strong, as if he could lift a car without effort. The Earth Colossus, he said, his voice deeper and resonating like distant thunder. Strength, durability, and earth manipulation. To demonstrate, Percy stomped his foot. The ground responded instantly, a wave of sand rising and solidifying into a perfect stone wall before them. With another gesture, the wall crumbled back into sand. This is, Percy searched for words. It's like being a living earthquake. I can feel fault lines, stress points in the earth. I could probably cause or prevent tremors if I wanted to. That's a lot of power, Annabeth said cautiously. How does it feel? Are you in complete control? Percy flexed his stone-like hands. Yes, but it's tempting. Part of me wants to see just how much I can move, how much I can change. It's like the power wants to be used. Be careful, Chiron warned. That sensation may be the shadow's influence. Percy nodded, forcing himself to remain still despite the urge to reshape the arena around him. I can resist it, but it's there, pushing at the edges of my mind. What about your connection to water in this form? Annabeth asked. Percy reached out with his senses, trying to feel the moisture in the air as he had in the Water Sage form. It's muted. I can still sense it, but not manipulate it like before. This form is focused on earth, not water. So each transformation specializes, Chiron observed. Interesting. The chakra seal doesn't simply add powers, it shifts your affinity temporarily. Percy allowed the Earth Colossus transformation to fade, returning to his normal form. This transition left him more drained than the previous one, his muscles aching slightly as if he'd done an intense workout. That one takes more energy, he noted, catching his breath. Perhaps because it's further from your natural affinity, Annabeth suggested. As a son of Poseidon, water comes easily to you. Earth is related but different. What about the third form? Nico asked, speaking for the first time. The Shadow Hunter. Percy looked at the son of Hades, recognizing the interest in his dark eyes. Shadows were Nico's domain. He naturally wanted to know about a form that manipulated them. It feels slippery, Percy admitted. Less straightforward than the others. Like it's hiding something. That's the nature of shadows, Nico said. They conceal as much as they reveal. Percy hesitated, then decided they needed to know everything these forms could do, even the potentially dangerous ones. He focused on the shadowy purple symbol on the chakra seal, concentrating on the concept of darkness, not as absence, but as presence. The space between light, the silent movement of night. The hidden paths where others couldn't follow. The symbol responded, glowing with deep purple energy that seemed to absorb light rather than emit it. The transformation was subtle, wrapping around Percy like a second skin rather than surging through him. When it completed, his appearance had changed dramatically, his skin pale with shadow-like markings that seemed to shift across his face, his clothing black and form-fitting with subtle purple symbols that were difficult to focus on directly. This is. Percy's voice was now barely above a whisper, yet somehow carried clearly to everyone present. Different. He felt lighter, almost incorporeal. The edges of his body seemed to blur slightly, as if he weren't fully solid. Most strikingly, he could see differently. Shadows now appeared as distinct pathways rather than merely dark areas. The Shadow Hunter, he explained, moving across the arena with unnatural silence and speed. Stealth, shadow manipulation, enhanced reflexes. To demonstrate, Percy stepped into the shadow of a column, and vanished. A moment later, he emerged from Nico's shadow on the other side of the arena. Shadow travel, Nico said, impressed despite himself. But you're not exhausted by it. It's not quite the same as what you do, Percy explained, examining his shadow-tinged hands. I'm not traveling through the underworld. It's more like sliding between layers of reality. Using shadows as doorways. He demonstrated again, vanishing into one shadow and emerging from another, moving around the arena so quickly it was almost impossible to track him. I can see connections. Percy continued, his voice taking on a slightly echoing quality. Threads of possibility linking people and places. And I can sever them temporarily. Before anyone could ask what he meant, Percy made a slicing motion toward a nearby training dummy. Though he didn't touch it physically, the dummy's arm fell to the ground, the shadow connections that held it in place temporarily disrupted. Okay, that's a bit alarming, Grover commented nervously. Percy reformed the connections with another gesture, the dummy's arm reattaching as if it had never been separated. I sense the Guardians more clearly in this form, he said. They're similar. They exist partially in shadow space, which is why they can flicker in and out of our reality. Can you track them? Chiron asked. Percy closed his eyes, extending his awareness through the shadow pathways that now appeared so clearly to him. Yes. There are traces, like footprints in shadow space. They're not here now, but... His eyes snapped open. They're coming back, soon. Many more than before. A chill seemed to pass through the arena at his words. Percy allowed the Shadow Hunter transformation to fade, returning to his normal appearance. This transition left him even more drained than the Earth Colossus had, a bone-deep weariness settling over him. That one takes the most energy, he said, except ing a canteen of nectar from Annabeth and taking a small sip. The godly drink helped restore his strength, but he still felt unusually tired. It's furthest from your natural affinity, Nico observed. Water, earth, shadow. Each step takes you further from your core nature as a son of Poseidon. Which may be exactly what the shadow entity wants, Chiron said grimly. To pull you away from your errant strengths toward powers that are more malleable to its influence. Percy looked down at the chakra seal, where all three activated symbols now glowed faintly before fading back to dormancy. Quote, I felt it more strongly in the Shadow Hunter form, he admitted. Like something was watching me through my own eyes. Yet these powers may be necessary to defend against the Guardians, Annabeth pointed out. Especially if more are coming. A dangerous balance, Chiron agreed. We must be vigilant, Percy. If you sense the Shadow's influence growing too strong, you must tell us immediately. Percy nodded, though privately he wondered if he would even recognize the influence for what it was. The Shadow Hunter transformation had felt exhilarating despite the drain, the power to move unseen, to traverse shadow pathways. To perceive connections others couldn't. It would be easy to lose himself in such abilities. So what's the plan? He asked. If the Guardians are coming back in force, we need to be ready. I believe, Chiron said thoughtfully, that we need to understand more about this interdimensional seal and what exactly it's containing. The scroll may hold more answers than we've uncovered so far. And we need to prepare the camp's defenses, Clarice added. If these Guardians can bypass our magical boundaries, we'll need physical defenses as well. I can help with that, Percy said. Thinking of the Earth Colossus form. I could create stone barriers, reinforcements for vulnerable areas. Good, Chiron nodded. Annabeth, continue your research on the scroll and interdimensional theory. Clarice, organize defense teams. Percy, work on controlling these transformations. We need your powers, but we must minimize the risk to the seal. As the group dispersed to their various tasks, Percy remained in the center of the arena, looking down at the chakra seal on his wrist. 3 symbols activated, 6 still dormant. 3 steps already taken toward whatever the shadow entity was planning. We'll find a way to fix this, Annabeth said, placing a hand on his arm. We always do. Percy wished he could share her confidence. But as he felt the power of the chakra seal pulsing gently against his skin, he couldn't shake the sensation that they were already playing by the shadow's rules, and that the game had been rigged from the start. Yeah, he said anyway, forcing a smile. We always do. But in the back of his mind, he could almost hear the shadow's voice from his dream. Each transformation brings me closer to freedom. 3 down, 6 to go, and the Guardians were coming. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Shadows between worlds. The Roman delegation arrived at sunset, silhouetted against the orange sky as they crested Half-Blood Hill. 6 demigods in purple shirts marched in perfect formation behind their leader, a tall figure whose golden armor gleamed in the fading light. Frank Zhang, praetor of the 12th Legion, had come personally to assess the situation. Percy stood at the base of the hill alongside Chiron and the senior Greek counselors, his hands stuffed in his pockets to hide the nervous tapping of his fingers against the chakra seal. 3 days had passed since the testing session in the arena, and while the Guardians hadn't returned yet, the pressure of waiting had everyone on edge. Frank, Percy greeted with a genuine smile as the Romans reached them. The two had been through enough together that formality seemed pointless. Frank clasped Percy's arm in the Roman style, but his eyes immediately dropped to the device visible on Percy's wrist. So it's true, he said quietly. Yeah, Percy resisted the urge to hide the seal again. It's been an interesting week. That's one way of putting it. Frank's expression remained carefully neutral. Raina sends her regards. She wanted to come herself, but with everything happening, the disturbances are affecting New Rome too, Chiron asked. Frank nodded grimly. Ghostly apparitions in the forum. Strange weather patterns. The augurs are in a panic. The entrails keep shifting forms mid-reading. Charming, Rachel muttered from behind Percy. We've had to put the entire camp on high alert, Frank continued. The Larrys are going haywire, appearing and disappearing at random. And we've had incursions, creatures we've never seen before, moving through our defenses like they aren't even there. Percy exchanged a glance with Annabeth. Like the Guardians we faced. Not exactly, Frank said. These were more bestial. But they had the same flickering quality, like they weren't fully in our reality. Chiron's tail flicked anxiously. Let us continue this discussion inside. The borders may not stop these interdimensional beings, but they still keep out prying eyes. As they walked toward the big house, Percy noticed how the Roman delegates kept a careful distance from him, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright suspicion. Only Frank maintained his usual friendly demeanor, though even he seemed more reserved than normal. They're afraid of me, Percy realized aloud. Frank glanced at him. They're afraid of what's happening. You're just the most visible symbol of it. Great, Percy muttered. The rec room of the big house was crowded with the addition of the Roman delegates. Maps and diagrams covered the ping-pong table, along with scrolls and ancient texts that Annabeth had been studying. The original scroll that had bonded Percy to the chakra seal sat in a protective case at the center. We've been tracking disturbances across the country, Chiron explained, pointing to markers on a map. They're increasing in frequency and intensity. Concentrated here and in the Bay Area, Frank noted, studying the pattern. Around the two camps, and along ley lines connecting them. Annabeth added, the magical boundaries between dimensions seem to be thinning most quickly where divine power already concentrates. One of the Roman delegates, a thin boy with glasses that Percy didn't recognize, stepped forward. Our augurs believe these disturbances are the result of tampering with forces beyond our understanding, he said, looking pointedly at Percy's wrist. Your augurs would be right, Percy replied evenly. But I didn't exactly volunteer for this. Intentional or not, the effects are the same, the boy countered. Foreign power introduced into our reality, weakening the boundaries between worlds. Marcus, Frank warned, we're here to gather information, not assign blame. With respect, Praetor, Marcus continued, the Senate sent us to assess the threat. From what I'm seeing, it's sitting right there. He nodded toward the chakra seal. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Percy felt a familiar anger build in his chest. The same frustration he'd faced so many times before when blamed for circumstances beyond his control. "I'm trying to fix this," he said, his voice tight. "Not make it worse. By using the very power that's causing the problem," Marcus challenged. Annabeth stepped between them. "We've been researching alternatives. The chakra seal is bound to Percy on a fundamental level. Removing it forcibly could cause more damage than leaving it in place. And it may be our only effective weapon against the beings that can cross these weakened boundaries," Chiron added. "Percy has already demonstrated his ability to fight the Guardians using the seal's power." Marcus looked unconvinced, but Frank gestured for him to step back. "We need all the information you have," the Praetor said. "Everything about these transformations, the entities you've encountered, and what you've learned about the scroll." Percy described his 3 transformations in detail, along with the dream encounter with the shadow entity and the warning from the Guardians. As he spoke, he noticed the Romans' expressions shifting from suspicion to reluctant fascination. "So this shadow claims it will be freed if you activate all 9 transformations?" Frank asked. "That's the impression I got," Percy confirmed. "Each transformation weakens the seal a little more. Yet you continue to use them," Marcus pointed out. "Because we're under attack," Clarice snapped, losing patience with the Roman. "Or would you prefer we hand Percy over to the Guardians and hope they're feeling generous?" "No one is suggesting that," Frank said firmly. "But we need to consider all options, including containment," Marcus added quietly. The word hung in the air like a thundercloud. Percy felt Annabeth tense beside him. "Percy isn't the threat," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "He's as much a victim in this as anyone." "No one is containing anyone," Chiron stated with finality. "This meeting is about pooling our knowledge and resources, not dividing them." Frank nodded. "Agreed. The Senate may have its concerns, but I'm here as an ally, Percy. You know that." Percy appreciated the support, but he couldn't ignore the underlying tension. The divide between Greek and Roman had narrowed over the years, but it hadn't disappeared entirely. In a crisis, old suspicions resurfaced quickly. "Maybe I should demonstrate," he suggested suddenly. "Show you exactly what these transformations can do, so you understand what we're dealing with." Frank considered this, then nodded. "That might help. The Senate will want a first-hand report anyway. Tomorrow morning, then," Chiron decided. "For now, our guests should rest. It's been a long journey from California." As the meeting dispersed, Percy lingered behind with Annabeth. Once they were alone, he let out a long breath. "That went well," he said sarcastically. "Better than it could have," Annabeth replied, straightening the papers on the table. "At least Frank is on our side. For now." Percy rubbed his wrist above the chakra seal. "But if things get worse, we'll handle it," Annabeth assured him. "We always do." Percy wished he could share her confidence. But as he looked down at the seal, with 3 of its 9 symbols now activated, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. That night, Percy couldn't sleep. The weight of the Romans' suspicion, combined with the constant awareness of the chakra seal on his wrist, kept his mind racing. After hours of restless tossing, he gave up and slipped out of the Poseidon cabin. The camp was quiet under a waxing moon, the only sounds the distant crash of waves against the shore and the creak of the big house weather vane. Percy walked aimlessly, eventually finding himself at the canoe lake. The water looked black in the moonlight, its surface rippling gently in the night breeze. Percy sat on the dock, dangling his feet above the water without touching it. Even from here, he could feel the lake responding to his presence, the currents shifting subtly, the water molecules vibrating with anticipation. Couldn't sleep either. Percy turned to see Annabeth approaching. A blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the night chill. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Too much on my mind," he admitted. "Want to talk about it?" Percy hesitated. "I'm not sure what to say. Everything's happening so fast, and I feel like I'm just reacting, not directing any of it." "That's not new for us," Annabeth pointed out with a small smile. "No, but this is different." Percy held up his wrist, where the chakra seal gleamed faintly in the moonlight. "This isn't some prophecy or quest from the gods. It's something completely outside our experience. Outside our world, even." Annabeth leaned her head against his shoulder. "I've been thinking about that. Maybe it's not as separate as we think. What do you mean? Well, we know the ancient myths overlap, right? Greek and Roman, Norse and Egyptian. They're different interpretations of similar cosmic forces. What if these realms the scroll mentions are just other ways of understanding the same universe? Percy considered this. So the chakra seal isn't giving me powers from other dimensions, but just different perspectives on power that already exists. It's a theory, Annabeth said. It would explain why each transformation feels both foreign and familiar to you. The water sage enhances your existing connection to water but approaches it from a different paradigm. That actually makes sense, Percy said, surprised. So what's the shadow, then? Another interpretation of some force we already know. Annabeth frowned. That's where my theory gets complicated. If these boundaries between interpretations of reality have always existed, something must maintain them. Keep each paradigm separate but connected. And the shadow wants to tear down those boundaries, Percy concluded. Merge everything together, which could be catastrophic, Annabeth nodded. Imagine Greek gods, Egyptian magic, Eastern chakra, and who knows what else all existing simultaneously in the same space. With no rules to govern their interactions. Percy shuddered at the thought. Cosmic chaos. Exactly. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the moonlight play across the lake's surface. Eventually, Percy spoke again. I can feel it, you know. When I transform, the power wants to be used. It's like it has its own agenda. Annabeth turned to face him, her gray eyes serious in the dim light. Is it getting harder to control? Not exactly. But each time, I understand more about what I can do, and it's tempting. Percy flexed his fingers, remembering the sensation of reshaping stone as the earth colossus. Of sliding through shadows as the shadow hunter. It would be so easy to just let go. See what happens. That's what scares the Romans, Annabeth said softly. Not you, but the potential in you. I know, and honestly, it scares me too. Annabeth took his hand, her fingers warm against his. As long as it scares you, I'm not worried. It's when godlike power tops frightening you that you should be concerned. Percy squeezed her hand gratefully. When did you get so wise? Daughter of Athena, she reminded him with a smile. It's in the job description. Percy leaned in to kiss her. A momentary escape from the weight of dimensional crises and political tensions. For a few seconds, there was only Annabeth, her warmth, her scent, the gentle pressure of her lips against his. When they separated, Percy felt calmer than he had in days. We should try to sleep, he said reluctantly. Big demonstration tomorrow. Just be careful, Annabeth warned as they stood. The Romans are looking for reasons to trust you, but also reasons not to. Don't give them the latter. When have I ever been anything but diplomatic? Percy asked innocently. Annabeth's laugh echoed across the quiet lake. Good night, seaweed brain. As Percy watched her walk back toward the Athena cabin, a strange sensation prickled at the back of his neck. He turned, scanning the darkness around the lake, but saw nothing unusual, yet the feeling persisted, a sense of being observed by eyes that existed just beyond normal perception. Percy activated his water sage senses without fully transforming, a technique he'd been practicing. The world shifted slightly, water molecules becoming visible as tiny points of blue light. And there, at the edge of the forest, a disturbance in the pattern. A void where water molecules bent around something that shouldn't be there. I know you're watching, Percy called out, his voice carrying across the still lake. Show yourself. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air seemed to ripple, and a figure stepped out of nothingness, a guardian, similar to those Percy had fought before but smaller, its mask marked with different symbols. Percy tensed, ready to fully transform if the guardian attacked. But it made no aggressive moves, simply standing at the forest's edge, observing him with eyes that glowed faintly behind its mask. What do you want? Percy demanded. The guardian remained silent, its form flickering slightly as if struggling to maintain solidity in this reality. Are you here for the seal? Percy pressed, touching the device on his wrist. Because I can't remove it. Believe me, I've tried. Finally, the guardian spoke, its voice carrying the same strange resonance Percy's had when transformed. Vessel, it said, the word translating itself in Percy's mind. You do not understand what you have begun. Then explain it to me, Percy challenged, taking a step forward. What is the shadow? What am I supposedly helping to free? The Guardian's form flickered more intensely. The devourer of possibilities. The unmaker of boundaries. That which should remain beyond. That's not an explanation, Percy said in frustration. That's a bunch of ominous titles. Names have power, the Guardian replied. True names most of all. We do not speak its true name, lest we draw its attention more directly. Percy thought quickly. This Guardian seemed different from the others, more willing to communicate. Why are you here alone? The others attacked in groups. I observe, I report, I do not engage. The Guardian's head tilted slightly. Yet, you're scouts, Percy realized, preparing for something bigger. The Guardian didn't confirm or deny this, but its silence was answer enough. Look, Percy said, trying a different approach. I don't want to free this shadow thing any more than you do. Help me find a way to remove the seal without making things worse. Impossible, the Guardian stated flatly. The binding is complete. You are the vessel now. The process cannot be reversed, only completed or terminated. The way it said, terminated, sent a chill down Percy's spine. Meaning what, exactly? If the vessel ceases, the seal returns to dormancy. You want to kill me, Percy translated. We wish to preserve the boundaries, the Guardian corrected, as if this were an important distinction. Your existence threatens them. Your death would stabilize them. Not loving that option, Percy said dryly. Any alternatives? The Guardian was silent for a moment, its form becoming more stable as if it were committing more fully to this reality. There is one who might help. A Guardian who studies the forbidden knowledge. One who walks too close to boundaries. Another Guardian. Where can I find them? They will find you, the Guardian said, already beginning to fade from view. When the time comes, vessel, remember that not all who guard share the same vision of protection. Wait. Percy started, but the Guardian had already disappeared, leaving only a faint disturbance in the air that quickly settled. Percy remained by the lake for several minutes, processing the cryptic conversation. At least now he knew for certain, the Guardians did intend to kill him if they couldn't recover the seal. But this mention of another Guardian, one who might help, that was new. As he finally turned to head back to his cabin, Percy couldn't shake the feeling that invisible eyes still watched from the darkness. Whether Guardian, shadow, or something else entirely, he couldn't tell. But one thing was clear, the boundaries between worlds were growing thinner by the day, and creatures from beyond were taking an increasing interest in Camp Half-Blood. And in him, morning arrived with a sense of anticipation hanging over the camp. Word of Percy's demonstration had spread, and even campers not normally interested in council meetings gathered at the arena. The Romans stood in a tight formation on one side, their purple shirts a stark contrast to the orange of Camp Half-Blood. Percy stood in the center of the arena, trying to ignore the hundreds of eyes fixed on him. Chiron and Frank stood nearby, while Annabeth, Grover, and the other senior counselors formed a loose circle around the perimeter, ostensibly to keep younger campers back, but Percy suspected they were also positioned to intervene if something went wrong. Today, Chiron announced to the assembled crowd, we witness the power granted to Percy Jackson through the artifact known as the Chakra Seal. This demonstration is for educational purposes, to help us understand what we face in the coming days. Percy caught Frank's eye. The praetor gave him an encouraging nod, though the Romans behind him maintained their stoic expressions. Begin when ready, Percy, Chiron said, stepping back. Percy took a deep breath, centering himself. He'd decided to start with the water sage transformation, as it was most familiar and least likely to alarm the Romans. He focused on his connection to water, feeling the moisture in the air, the distant pull of the ocean, the water flowing in the veins of every person around him. The blue symbol on the chakra seal activated. Glowing brightly, energy washed over Percy, and he transformed into the water sage form, his skin taking on the blue tinge, wave-like markings appearing around his eyes. His clothes shifting to the light blue and silver outfit with glowing symbols. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by murmurs of amazement. Even the Romans looked impressed despite themselves. This is the water sage form, Percy explained, his voice carrying that distinctive resonance. It enhances my natural affinity for water. To demonstrate, he drew moisture from the air, forming it into complex shapes above his head, a trident, a pegasus, an eagle for the Romans. The water moved with perfect precision, maintaining details that would be impossible with his normal powers. I can sense water everywhere. Percy continued. Purify it, reshape it, even use it for healing. He called for a volunteer with a minor injury. After a moment's hesitation, one of the younger Roman delegates stepped forward, displaying a bruised wrist from training. May I? Percy asked. The Roman nodded warily. Percy drew a small sphere of water from the air, infused it with glowing energy, and gently pressed it against the bruise. The water sank into the skin, the discoloration fading visibly as the injury healed. Impressive, Frank commented. But how effective is it in combat? Percy nodded, accepting the challenge. Clarice, care to help demonstrate? Clarice grinned, stepping into the arena with her electric spear, Maimer. Don't hold back, Jackson. Wouldn't dream of it. Clarice charged, her spear crackling with energy. Percy didn't draw Riptide. Instead, he moved with the enhanced reflexes of the water sage, flowing around Clarice's attacks like water around a rock. She thrust her spear toward his chest. Percy formed a shield of condensed water that absorbed the electricity, channeling it harmlessly into the ground. Water conducts electricity, Percy explained. Ed to the crowd as he continued to evade Clarice's increasingly frustrated attacks. But in this form, I can control that conductivity, directing it where I want it to go. To demonstrate, he caught the tip of Maimer in another water shield, but this time channeled the electricity through a thin stream of water that he shot toward a training dummy several yards away. The dummy's hair stood on end as the current passed through it. Enough, Chiron called after a few more exchanges. Well demonstrated. Percy and Clarice separated, the daughter of Ares looking annoyed that she hadn't landed a single blow but grudgingly impressed. Now, Chiron continued, Percy has access to 2 additional transformations. The Earth Colossus form enhances strength and allows manipulation of stone and earth. Percy allowed the Water Sage transformation to fade, returning briefly to his normal appearance before focusing on the deep green symbol on the chakra seal. As he concentrated on the feeling of earth beneath his feet, the symbol activated, and power surged through him, heavier and more forceful than the Water Sage. When the transformation completed, Percy stood taller and broader, his skin with the green-brown tinge and mountain-like markings, his clothing transformed into the armor-like material in earthen tones. The Earth Colossus, Percy said, his voice now deeper and resonating like distant thunder. Strength, durability, and earth manipulation. To demonstrate the strength, Percy approached a massive boulder that had been placed in the arena for training purposes, a rock that would normally take 3 campers to move. He lifted it with one hand, holding it overhead as if it weighed nothing. The Romans muttered among themselves, their expressions now showing clear concern beneath the fascination. Percy set the boulder down gently, then demonstrated the earth manipulation by placing his palm against the ground. The arena floor rippled like water, and stone walls rose in a complex pattern before sinking back into the earth without leaving a trace. This form allows me to reshape terrain, Percy explained. Create barriers, bridges, or weapons from stone. I can also sense vibrations through the ground, essentially seeing with my feet. And the third form? Frank asked, his voice carefully neutral. Percy hesitated. The Shadow Hunter was the most unnerving of his transformations. The one where the shadow's influence felt strongest. But the Romans needed to understand what they were dealing with, all of it. The third is called the Shadow Hunter, Percy said, allowing the Earth Colossus form to fade. He focused on the shadowy purple symbol, concentrating on darkness as presence rather than absence. The transformation wrapped around him like a second skin, leaving high M with pale skin marked by shifting shadow patterns, black form-fitting clothing with subtle purple symbols, and that sense of being slightly less than fully solid. This form enables stealth, shadow manipulation, and enhanced reflexes. Percy explained, his voice now barely above a whisper yet carrying clearly. It also allows me to perceive connections between things that normal vision can't detect. To demonstrate, Percy stepped into a nearby shadow, and vanished. A moment later, he emerged from Frank's shadow on the other side of the arena, startling the praetor. Shadow travel, Percy explained. But different from what children of Hades can do. I'm moving through what might be called Shadow space, a layer of reality that exists alongside our own. He demonstrated by moving rapidly around the arena, appearing and disappearing from various shadows faster than the eye could track. Finally, he reappeared in the center, slightly winded but otherwise fine. I can also perceive and manipulate connections, Percy continued, gesturing toward a rack of training weapons. Shadowy threads became visible, connecting the weapons to their stands. With a quick motion, Percy severed several connections, causing the weapons to fall, then reconnected them, the weapons jumping back to their places as if pulled by invisible strings. In this form, I can sense the Guardians most clearly, Percy added. They exist partially in shadow space, which is why they can move through our reality the way they do. The demonstration complete, Percy allowed the Shadow Hunter transformation to fade, returning to his normal appearance. The transition left him tired but not exhausted. He was getting better at managing the energy cost of switching forms. A heavy silence had fallen over the arena. The Roma-NS were exchanging glances that Percy couldn't quite interpret, while the Greek campers looked both impressed and unsettled. "These transformations," Frank said finally, "they're powerful. More powerful than most demigod abilities I've seen. Which is why we need to treat this situation with the utmost caution," Chiron agreed. "Percy has shown remarkable restraint in using these powers, but we must be mindful of their origin and potential consequences." Before anyone could respond, a commotion broke out at the back of the crowd. Campers were scattering, pointing at something in the sky. Percy looked up to see a tear forming in the air above the arena, a rift similar to what the Guardians had created, but larger, more unstable. "Everyone back," Chiron ordered. "Greeks, defensive formation theta. Romans, to your praetor." Percy reached for the chakra seal, ready to transform again, but hesitated, which form would be most effective against whatever was coming. Before he could decide, figures began dropping through the rift. Guardians, at least a dozen of them, led by a larger one whose mask featured more elaborate markings. "The vessel must be contained," the lead Guardian announced, its voice booming across the arena. "Surrender the seal, or we will take it by force." Frank drew his sword, the golden blade gleaming in the morning light. "You're trespassing on sacred ground," he called out. "Leave now, or face the combined might of Rome and Greece." The lead Guardian made a dismissive gesture. "Your boundaries mean nothing to us, demigod. This is beyond your understanding." Percy stepped forward, deliberately placing himself between the Guardians and the campers. "I think we understand just fine," he said. "You want the seal, but it's bound to me. Your scout told me as much last night." The lead Guardian's posture changed slightly, surprise, perhaps. "You spoke with an observer." "Impossible. They do not engage." "This one did," Percy countered. "And it mentioned another Guardian who might actually help instead of just threatening to kill me." A ripple seemed to pass through the Guardian ranks at this. The lead Guardian raised a hand, and the others tensed, clearly preparing to attack. "Enough talk," it declared. "The vessel will be contained." Percy didn't wait for them to make the first move. He activated the water sage transformation, blue energy washing over him. As he drew moisture from the air to form a protective barrier around himself and the nearest campers. The Guardians attacked as one, several transforming mid-leap. One became wreathed in flames, another crackled with electricity. A third seemed to fade partially from view. The remaining Guardians drew weapons of shimmering energy, swords, spears, and what looked like chakrams that glowed with various colors. The arena erupted into chaos. Roman and Greek demigods fought side by side against the Guardians, but their celestial bronze and imperial gold weapons passed through the interdimensional beings unless they struck at exactly the right moment. Only Percy, with his enhanced senses, could reliably time his attacks to hit the Guardians when they were solid. As the water sage, Percy fought defensively, creating barriers to protect the campers and using water whips to disrupt the Guardians' attacks. But he quickly realized they were targeting the younger, less experienced demigods, forcing him to spread his protection too thin. "I need to switch forms," Percy called to Annabeth, who was fighting nearby with her dagger. "Cover me," she nodded, moving to guard his flank as Percy allowed the water sage transformation to fade. Immediately, he activated the Earth Colossus, green energy surging through him. As the transformation completed, Percy slammed his fist into the ground, creating a shockwave that knocked several guardians off balance. "Get the younger campers out of here," he shouted, his voice carrying over the din of battle. With the Earth Colossus's strength, Percy tore a massive chunk of stone from the arena floor and hurled it at the fire-wreathed guardian, forcing it to dodge away from a group of cornered Apollo campers. Frank had transformed into a massive bear, high-S claws somehow able to affect the guardians despite their fluctuating tangibility. Clarice fought back to back with a Roman centurion, their coordinated attacks keeping a lightning-wielding guardian at bay. But the lead guardian was moving purposefully through the battle, heading directly for Percy. It had transformed as well, its form now surrounded by swirling energy that seemed to bend light around it. "The vessel cannot escape," it intoned, raising a hand toward Percy. The air between them distorted, and Percy felt an immense pressure pushing against him, as if reality itself were trying to crush him. Percy struggled against the force, the Earth Colossus's durability barely keeping him on his feet. He needed something else, something that could counter this guardian's control over dimensional space. The Shadow Hunter. Percy allowed the Earth Colossus form to fade, immediately focusing on the shadowy purple symbol. The transformation wrapped around him just as the lead guardian's attack intensified. But now, instead of being crushed by the distortion, Percy could see it, threads of reality being manipulated, connections being strained. And he could sever those connections. Percy moved through shadow space, appearing directly behind the lead guardian. Before it could react, he slashed through the shadowy threads it was using to generate the spatial distortion. The attack dissipated, and the guardian staggered, momentarily disoriented. "You're not the only one who can manipulate connections," Percy said, his whisper voice somehow cutting through the noise of battle. The lead guardian turned, its masked face revealing nothing. "You understand nothing of what you wield, vessel. The shadow corrupts you even now." "I understand enough," Percy countered, moving through space again as the guardian attacked with a blade of pure energy. He reappeared on the guardian's flank, severing more connections, not to harm the being, but to disrupt its control over its own transformative powers. The lead guardian's form flickered violently, its transformation destabilizing. It raised its hand again, this time creating a small rift in the air, an escape route. "This is not over, vessel," it declared. "The convergence approaches. The boundaries weaken. We will return in greater numbers. And we'll be waiting," Percy replied. The lead guardian seemed about to say more, but sudden attack from behind caught it off guard. One of its own, a smaller guardian with distinctive markings on its mask, had thrust an energy blade toward its back. The lead guardian barely avoided the blow, whirling to face the attacker. "Traitor," it hissed. The smaller guardian said nothing, continuing its attack with surprising ferocity. The other guardians noticed the betrayal and began to disengage from their battles with the demigods, converging on the two fighting figures. "Fall back," the lead guardian commanded, slipping through its escape rift. Most of the other guardians followed, creating their own rifts or diving through existing ones. Within moments, only the traitorous guardian remained, now surrounded by confused demigods. Percy approached cautiously, still in his Shadow Hunter form. "Who are you?" he demanded. The guardian deactivated its energy blade and slowly reached up to remove its mask. The face beneath was unexpectedly human, a young woman with sharp features and eyes that glowed with the same energy as the chakra seal. "My name is Kira Mizuki," she said, her voice carrying the same resonance as Percy's transformed voice. "And I've just committed treason against the Dimensional Guardians to save your life, vessel. So I sincerely hope you're worth it." The War Council reconvened in the big house immediately after the battle, the mood tense and urgent. Kira sat at the ping-pong table, her guardian armor deactivated to reveal simple black clothing underneath. Her wrist bore a device similar to Percy's chakra seal but darker in coloration and with different symbols. Percy had returned to his normal form but remained standing, too agitated to sit. Frank stood beside Chiron at the head of the table, while the other senior counselors and Roman delegates filled the remaining spaces. "Explain yourself," Chiron said to Kira, his voice firm but not unkind. Why would a dimensional guardian turn against her own? Kira's glowing eyes, the only outward sign of her otherworldly nature now that her armor was deactivated, surveyed the room carefully before answering. The Guardians are divided, she said finally. Most follow Takeshi, our leader, who believes the only solution is to recover the chakra seal and terminate its vessel. She nodded toward Percy, to prevent the shadow's escape. And you disagree? Annabeth asked. I believe there's another way, Kira confirmed. One that doesn't require sacrificing an innocent life. How generous of you, Percy muttered. Kira fixed him with a level gaze. You don't understand what's at stake, Vessel. Percy, he corrected. My name is Percy Jackson, not Vessel. And I understand more than you think. The shadow talked to me in a dream. It wants to tear down the boundaries between realms, merge everything together. Creating chaos beyond imagining, Kira nodded. What you call the shadow is actually Deimos. Deimos, Percy repeated in surprise. The god of terror. Not exactly, Kira said. Not as you know him. In your mythology, Deimos is a minor deity, son of Ares and Aphrodite. But across the multiverse, concepts take different forms in different realms. In some, Deimos evolved into something greater, more primordial, a terror god who transcended his original mythology, Annabeth said thoughtfully. Becoming something closer to a force of nature. Precisely, Kira agreed. This version of Deimos grew so powerful that he threatened the stability of his own realm. The original Guardians, the founders of our order, worked with powerful entities from multiple realms to seal him away in a pocket dimension. A prison between realities. The scroll, Percy realized. It's connected to the seal somehow. The scroll is part of the key, Kira confirmed. It contains the knowledge of how to access and manipulate the barriers between realms. The chakra seal is the physical manifestation of that knowledge, a tool that allows its wearer to channel power from multiple realms simultaneously. So when I read the scroll, Percy began. You initiated a connection to the seal containing Deimos, Kira finished. Not enough to free him, but enough to create a link. Each time you transform, you draw power across realms, temporarily weakening the boundaries that keep Deimos imprisoned. And if I use all 9 transformations? Percy asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The seal will fracture completely, Kira said grimly. Deimos will escape his prison and begin the convergence, the forced merging of all realms into one chaotic whole, with him as its center. A heavy silence fell over the room as everyone processed this information. Finally, Frank spoke. If the chakra seal is bound to Percy, and removing it would kill him, what's your alternative solution? He asked Kira directly. Reinforcement, she replied. The original seal was created by channeling power from multiple realms to create a barrier that Deimos couldn't break. I believe W.E. can do the same thing again. Use the chakra seal not to break the prison, but to strengthen it. How? Chiron asked. By reaching the heart of the seal, Kira said. The physical location where the barriers between realms are thinnest. There, with the right ritual, the vessel, Percy, could redirect the power he's channeling back into the barriers, sealing Deimos more securely than before. Where is this heart? Annabeth asked. It exists in multiple places simultaneously, but the nearest access point in this realm would be what you call the Mount Diablo in California. Near Camp Jupiter, Frank noted with a frown. We've been experiencing the strongest disturbances there. Because the boundaries are already thin in that location, Kira explained. It's why your camp was established there in the first place. Though your ancestors may not have understood the true reason. Divine power naturally concentrates at weak points between realms. Percy paced the length of the room, processing everything he'd heard. So I need to get to Mount Diablo and perform some kind of ritual to reinforce the seal instead of breaking it. How do I do that, exactly? I can teach you, Kira said. But it won't be easy. You'll need to master all 9 transformations first. But using the transformations weakens the seal, Annabeth pointed out. Isn't that counterproductive? A calculated risk, Kira admitted. The seal will weaken temporarily, yes. But with all 9 powers activated, Percy will have the ability to channel enough energy to repair the damage and strengthen the barriers permanently. If this plan fails, Chiron said gravely, you could inadvertently free Deimos completely. And if we do nothing, Kira countered, Takeshi and the other Guardians will continue hunting Percy until they kill him and recover the seal. Even then, the damage already done to the barriers will remain. This is the only way to truly fix what's been started. Percy stopped pacing and looked directly at Kira. Why are you helping me? What made you turn against the other guardians? Kira hesitated, her glowing eyes dimming slightly. I was an observer before I was a guardian. My role was to study the realms, not just protect them. I've seen what happens when we intervene too directly, the damage we can cause in the name of protection. She met Percy's gaze steadily. And I've seen enough vessels die. There's been too much sacrifice already. Something in her voice suggested personal experience, but Percy didn't press. Instead, he turned to Chiron and Frank. I think we should try her plan. It's better than waiting around to be hunted or hoping Deimos just stays put with a damaged seal. The journey to Mount Diablo won't be easy, Frank warned. If the boundaries are weakening most quickly there, you'll face all manner of interdimensional incursions along the way. Which is why I propose a joint quest, Percy said. Greeks and Romans together, with Kira as our guide. We'll need all the help we can get. Frank nodded slowly. I'll send word to Reyna. Camp Jupiter will prepare for your arrival. He glanced at Marcus and the other Roman delegates. And I believe the Senate will approve this course of action. Given the alternatives, Marcus looked like he wanted to object but remained silent after a warning glance from Frank. Then it's settled, Chiron declared. Percy, Annabeth, and Kira will lead a small group to Camp Jupiter, where they'll prepare for the ritual at Mount Diablo. We should leave as soon as possible, Kira advised. The boundaries continue to weaken with each passing hour. Tomorrow at first light, Chiron decided. That will give us time to prepare supplies and choose the right companions for the journey. As the meeting dispersed, Percy approached Kira, who remained seated at the table, her expression unreadable. Thank you, he said simply, for taking the risk to help me. Kira looked up at him, her glowing eyes studying his face. Don't thank me yet, Percy Jackson. I've given you hope, but the path ahead is more dangerous than you can imagine. Takeshi will not stop hunting us, and Deimos grows stronger with each transformation you undergo. I've faced gods and titans before, Percy said. I'm not afraid of Deimos. You should be, Kira replied quietly. Because he's not just the god of terror. In the form he's evolved into, Deimos is terror itself, the fundamental fear that exists in all conscious beings across all realms. And he can use that fear against you. Fear can be overcome, Percy insisted. I hope you're right, Kira said, rising from her seat. Because soon, you'll need to master transformations that will bring you closer to Deimos than ever before. And when that happens, he'll be looking directly into your mind, searching for the fears you keep buried deepest. With that sobering thought, she walked away, leaving Percy alone with the weight of what lay ahead, a journey across a fragmenting America, 6 more transformations to master. And a confrontation with the god of terror at the heart of a weakening interdimensional seal. Just another quest in the life of Percy Jackson. Preparations began immediately. Annabeth coordinated with Chiron to select the right companions for the journey, while Percy and Kira worked on controlling the transformations he had already mastered. Your technique is sloppy, Kira observed as Percy cycled from Water Sage to Earth Colossus and back again in the arena. You're forcing the transitions instead of flowing through them. I've only had the seal for a week, Percy protested, slightly winded from the rapid transformations. Cut me some slack. Deimos won't cut you any slack, Kira replied without sympathy. Again, this time, don't think of them as separate forms. They're aspects of the same power, filtered through different elemental affinities. Percy took a deep breath and tried again, focusing on the underlying energy of the chakra seal rather than the specific transformations. This time, the transition between Water Sage and Earth Colossus was smoother, less draining. Better, Kira acknowledged. Now add the Shadow Hunter. This was the trickiest transition. The Shadow Hunter form felt fundamentally different from the others, more elusive and unpredictable. Percy concentrated, allowing the Earth Colossus to fade and immediately focusing on the shadowy purple symbol. The transformation wrapped around him smoothly, leaving him in the pale, shadow-marked form. Good, Kira said, circling him with a critical eye. But you're still holding back in this form. You're afraid of it. I'm not afraid, Percy insisted, his whisper voice carrying clearly despite its softness. It's just different. I can feel Deimos more strongly when I'm the Shadow Hunter. Of course you can, Kira said. Shadows exist in the spaces between light, the boundaries. This form brings you closest to the edges of reality, where Deimos' influence is strongest. Percy moved through shadow space, appearing behind Kira to demonstrate his mastery of the form's abilities. I can handle it. Kira didn't seem surprised by his sudden appearance. Perhaps. But he next transformation will be even more challenging. Which one is it? Percy asked, allowing the Shadow Hunter form to fade. Kira activated her own chakra seal, transforming briefly into a form wreathed in golden light. The Mind Weaver, she said, her voice taking on a melodic quality. It allows perception and manipulation of thought patterns, both your own and others. She returned to her normal appearance. It's the most subtle of the transformations, and potentially the most dangerous. With it, you could influence others' perceptions, create illusions, even read surface thoughts. Mind control? Percy asked uneasily. Not exactly, Kira clarified. You can't force someone to act against their nature. But you can suggest. Enhance certain thoughts while diminishing others. Create illusions that the mind accepts as real. That sounds like a violation, Percy said, frowning. It can be, in the wrong hands, Kira agreed. Which is why mastering your own mind must come first. Mind Weaver transformation will expose you to Deimos' influence more directly than any you've experienced so far. If your mental defenses aren't strong enough, he could potentially influence you through the connection. Great, Percy muttered. So I'll be learning mind powers while fighting off the mental influence of a terror god. What could go wrong? We'll work up to it gradually, Kira assured him. For now, focus on perfecting the transitions between your current forms. The smoother and more efficient they become, the less energy you'll waste, and the less strain you'll place on the seal during each transformation. They continued practicing until sunset, by which time Percy could cycle through his 3 transformations with minimal effort. The energy drain was still noticeable, but no longer left him exhausted. As they walked back toward the big house, Percy finally asked the question that had been bothering him since Kira's revelation about Deimos. If I succeed, if we strengthen the seal and keep Deimos imprisoned, what happens to the chakra seal? Will I be stuck with it forever? Kira was silent for a moment before answering. The ritual will require you to channel all the energy you've accumulated through the transformations. If successful, the chakra seal should deactivate, becoming dormant once again. But it won't disappear, Percy noted. No, Kira confirmed. The binding is permanent, but a dormant seal would no longer draw power across realms or weaken boundaries. You could live a normal life, or as normal as any demigod's life can be. And if the ritual fails, Kira's glowing eyes met his. Then either Deimos escapes completely, or what? Or you take his place, she said quietly. Becoming the new vessel containing him, bound within the prison dimension for eternity. Percy stopped walking, staring at her. You didn't mention that part in the War Council. Would it have changed your decision? Kira challenged. After a moment, Percy shook his head. No, but I would have appreciated knowing all the risks. There are some things your friends don't need to worry about yet, Kira said. Especially Annabeth. I've seen how she looks at you. She deserves to know, Percy insisted. Then tell her, Kira replied simply. But understand that knowledge brings its own burden. She'll worry more, perhaps try to find alternatives where none exist. Sometimes, ignorance is a kindness. Not in my experience, Percy said firmly. We don't keep secrets from each other. Not anymore. Kira inclined her head in acknowledgement. As you wish. Just remember, Percy Jackson, this journey will test more than your physical strength or mastery of the transformations. It will test your relationships, your convictions, and ultimately, your willingness to sacrifice. I'm not afraid of sacrifice, Percy said. I've been willing to die for my friends before. Dying is easy, Kira said, her voice taking on a distant quality. I've watched countless vessels sacrifice their lives. But eternal imprisonment, conscious awareness while bound in a prison dimension, never aging, never changing, never free. That's a different kind of sacrifice entirely. Before Percy could respond, they reached the big house, where Annabeth waited on the porch. Her face brightened when she saw Percy, then grew more serious as she noticed his expression. What's wrong? She asked immediately. Percy glanced at Kira, who nodded slightly before continuing inside, leaving them alone. There's something I need to tell you about the ritual, Percy said, taking Annabeth's hand and leading her to a quiet corner of the porch. Something Kira just told me. As Percy explained the possibility of becoming Deimos's prison should the ritual fail, Annabeth's expression shifted from concern to determination. Then we won't let it fail, she said with finality. We'll find a way to make it work without you being trapped. Annabeth. No, she interrupted. I'm not accepting that as an outcome, Percy. We've faced impossible situations before and found third options. This time won't be different. Percy smiled despite himself. Annabeth's unwavering confidence was one of the things he loved most about her, her absolute refusal to accept defeat, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Okay, he agreed. We'll find another way, but if we can't, we will, she insisted, squeezing his hand. Now come on. We need to finalize the quest team. Chiron and I have some ideas. As they entered the big house, Percy felt a familiar prickling sensation at the back of his neck. The feeling of being watched by eyes that existed just beyond normal perception. He activated his water sage senses without transforming, scanning the surrounding area. There, at the edge of his awareness, a disturbance in the pattern of water molecules. Not a guardian this time, but something else. Something colder, more diffuse. The disturbance faded quickly, but Percy couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it left behind. Deimos was watching. And as the boundaries between realms continued to weaken, his gaze was growing stronger, more focused. The journey to Mount Diablo couldn't begin soon enough. Dawn arrived with a sense of urgency. The quest team gathered at the base of Half-Blood Hill, making final preparations for the journey west. Percy, Annabeth, and Kira would be joined by Grover, whose nature senses might prove valuable in detecting dimensional disturbances, and Nico, whose familiarity with shadows and the underworld could help navigate the increasingly unstable boundaries between realms. The Romans have arranged transportation from Indianapolis to Camp Jupiter, Chiron explained, handing Percy a sealed letter. Frank returned ahead of you to prepare their defenses and inform Reyna of the situation. Indianapolis is still a long way from here, Percy noted. How are we getting that far? The old-fashioned way, Chiron said. Argus will drive you as far as the Pennsylvania border. After that, you're on your own. The fluctuations in reality make magical transportation too unpredictable right now. Percy nodded, understanding the logic but not loving the prospect of crossing half the country on foot or by whatever mortal transportation they could arrange. What about monster attacks? Annabeth asked. With Percy channeling power from multiple realms, his scent will be stronger than ever. Chiron confirmed grimly. You can expect frequent encounters, not just with traditional Greek monsters but potentially beings from other mythological paradigms as well. Great, Percy muttered, because Greek monsters weren't enough fun already. Kira, who had been examining a map of the eastern United States, looked up. The dimensional disturbances are creating thin spots across the country, places where the boundaries between realms are weakest. We should avoid these when possible. She pointed to several locations marked on the map. Major convergences of ley lines. Sites of significant historical events. Places where mortal belief is particularly strong. These are all vulnerable points. So basically every tourist attraction in America, Grover said nervously. Wonderful. We'll manage, Percy said with more confidence than he felt. We always do. Chiron placed a hand on Percy's shoulder. Be cautious, my boy. This quest is unlike any you've undertaken before. The rules that govern our world, the ancient laws, the boundaries between mortal and divine, may not apply as you journey through these weakened spaces. I understand, Percy assured him. And Percy, Chiron added quietly, be mindful of the transformations. Each brings you closer to Deimos. Don't lose yourself in the power they offer. I won't, Percy promised. Final goodbyes were exchanged. Supplies were loaded into the camp's van, and the quest team climbed aboard. As Argus started the engine, Percy looked back at Camp Half-Blood, wondering when, or if, he would see it again. The journey had begun. The first day passed uneventfully, a welcome reprieve that no one expected to last. Argus drove them across New York and into New Jersey, maintaining a watchful silence. As his many eyes scanned the road and surroundings for threats. Percy spent much of the drive discussing strategy with Annabeth and Kira, while Grover nervously chewed on tin cans and Nico stared out the window, occasionally commenting on shadows that seemed to move against the flow of the sun. The Mind Weaver transformation, Percy said, returning to their earlier conversation. How do I access it? Kira considered before answering. It's connected to the color indigo on your chakra seal. To activate it, you must focus on the concept of thought itself, not just your own thoughts, but the patterns that underlie all consciousness. That's pretty abstract, Percy noted. Which is why it's challenging, Kira replied. The first 3 transformations connected to elements you could physically perceive: water, earth, shadow. The Mind Weaver deals with the intangible. What about the other 5 transformations? Annabeth asked. What are they? Each connects to a different aspect of reality, Kira explained. The Thunder Beast channels electrical energy and lightning. The Fox Spirit enhances speed, agility, and sensory perception. The Divine Sage provides access to wisdom and limited precognition. The Sea Emperor maximizes Percy's natural connection to the ocean, far beyond even the Water Sage. And the final transformation, the Nine-Tailed Guardian, combines aspects of all previous forms. Nine-tailed. Grover perked up. Like the fox from Japanese mythology. Similar concept, different execution, Kira said. The 9 tails represent the 9 realms, unified in a single vessel. It's the most powerful form, and the most dangerous to the seal. So I should avoid it until absolutely necessary, Percy concluded. Yes, Kira confirmed. It should only be attempted at the heart of the seal, during the ritual. The van slowed as Argus pulled into a rest stop somewhere in central Pennsylvania. The many-eyed security chief turned in his seat, his expression communicating CL. Early that this was as far as he could take them. End of the line, Percy translated, gathering his backpack. Thanks, Argus. They unloaded their supplies and watched as the camp van turned around and headed back east. Standing in the parking lot of the nondescript highway rest stop, the quest suddenly felt much more real, and more daunting. So, Nico said, breaking the silence. How exactly are we getting to Indianapolis? Bus, train, hitchhiking, or stealing a car? Percy listed pragmatically. The usual demigod travel options. I vote for the options that don't involve potential arrest, Annabeth said dryly. Bus it is, Grover decided, pointing to a schedule posted near the rest stop entrance. There's one heading west in 20 minutes. They purchased tickets with the mortal moan. Why Chiron had provided and settled into wait. Percy found himself scanning their surroundings constantly, the chakra seal on his wrist occasionally pulsing with faint energy as if sensing something he couldn't yet perceive. You feel it too? Kira asked quietly, noticing his vigilance. Percy nodded. Something's not right. Not dangerous, exactly, but off. The boundaries are thinner here than they should be, Kira confirmed. This isn't a natural convergence point. Something's accelerating the process. Demos, possibly, or perhaps something else taking advantage of the weakening barriers. The bus arrived, a weathered greyhound that had seen better days. As they boarded, Percy noticed the driver's eyes lingering on him a moment too long, not with the usual mortal indifference, but with an unsettling focus. Keep alert, he murmured to the others as they found seats near the back. I don't like the feel of this. The bus was half empty, the few other passengers appearing to be ordinary mortals absorbed in phones or sleeping against windows. As the vehicle pulled away from the rest stop, Percy found himself studying each person, trying to determine if any might be monsters in disguise or something worse. You're being paranoid, Annabeth whispered, though her hand rested on the hilt of her concealed dagger. Probably, Percy agreed, but better paranoid than. The bus swerved suddenly, cutting him off as passengers were thrown against their seats. Outside the windows, the afternoon sky darkened as if a storm had materialized from nowhere. Rain began pelting the glass, but the droplets moved wrong, sliding upward instead of down, defying gravity. That's not normal, Grover bleated nervously. The driver stood up, abandoning the wheel as the bus continued moving on its own. When he turned to face the passengers, his appearance had changed, his eyes now glowing with an unnatural light, his skin taking on a bluish tinge. Vessel, he said, his voice carrying that resonance Percy's had when transformed. You trespass where the boundaries grow thin. Guardian, Percy asked, rising from his seat. The driver shook his head slowly. No guardian. Merely opportunistic. With frightening speed, the driver's form shifted, elongating and twisting until he no longer resembled anything human. In his place stood a tall, spindly creature with too many joints and skin like wet paper. The other passengers remained oblivious, continuing to sleep or stare at their phones as if nothing unusual were happening. They cannot perceive me, the creature explained, noticing Percy's glance at the mortals. Their minds reject what does not fit their reality. But you, vessel, you who walk between realms, you see clearly. What are you? Hera demanded, her hand moving to her own chakra seal. A traveler. Like yourselves, the creature replied. But where you move physically between places, I move between possibilities. You might call me a divergent, a being who exists in the spaces where realities fork and branch. What do you want? Percy asked, riptide now in his hand though not yet uncapped. The divergent's lipless mouth stretched in what might have been a smile. To observe the vessel who weakens the walls. To witness the child of Poseidon who carries the key to the convergence. I'm not helping Deimos escape, Percy stated firmly. Intention matters little, the divergent said dismissively. Effect is what concerns me. And your effect on reality is substantial. The bus had stopped moving, though the engine still rumbled. Looking out the windows, Percy realized they were no longer on the highway but in some featureless gray space, like fog but more solid. Where have you taken us? Annabeth demanded. Nowhere, the divergent answered. Everywhere. The between space where possibilities overlap before diverging. Send us back, Hera ordered, her chakra seal beginning to glow. Now, the divergent tilted its head at an impossible angle. So aggressive, little guardian. I mean no harm. I merely wish to test. Before anyone could react, the creature lunged forward, impossibly fast, its elongated fingers wrapping around Percy's wrist where the chakra seal sat. Pain shot up Percy's arm as foreign energy coursed through the device. Instinctively, Percy transformed, blue light washing over him as he activated the water sage form. The divergent recoiled, its paper-like skin blistering where it had touched the seal. Interesting, it hissed. The vessel resists corruption. Percy formed water spears from moisture in the air, pointing them at the creature. Send us back to our reality, he demanded, his resonant voice carrying authority. The divergent seemed amused. Reality is relative, vessel. But very well, consider this a preliminary encounter. It made a twisting gesture with its too many jointed hands, and the gray fog outside the windows began to dissipate. Slowly, the familiar landscape of a Pennsylvania highway came back into view. We will meet again, vessel, the divergent said, its form already beginning to fade. When the boundaries grow thinner still. When your transformations bring you closer to the truth of what awaits. With those ominous words, the creature vanished entirely. The bus driver, the real one, an ordinary mortal, sat at the wheel, apparently unaware that anything unusual had occurred. The other passengers remained equally oblivious. Percy allowed his transformation to fade, returning to normal appearance before any mortals noticed. His friends looked as shaken as he felt. What was that thing? Grover whispered. Nothing from Greek mythology, Annabeth said with certainty. Hera's expression was grim. A divergent. They're rare, beings that evolved in the spaces between realities rather than within any single realm. They typically can't interact directly with stable dimensions, but with the boundaries weakening. Great, Nico muttered. So now we have to worry about monsters from our world and things from between worlds. It seemed more curious than hostile, Percy noted, though his wrist still throbbed where the creature had grabbed him. For now, Hera warned. But divergents are unpredictable. They perceive time differently, seeing all possibilities simultaneously. It may have been testing you for reasons that won't become clear until later. The bus continued west as if nothing had happened, carrying them deeper into an America where reality itself was becoming increasingly unstable. Percy stared out the window at the passing landscape, wondering how many strange encounters awaited them, and how much each transformation was costing the stability of the world around them. They reached Columbus, Ohio by nightfall, deciding to find lodging rather and continuing straight through to Indianapolis. The dimensional encounter with the divergent had left everyone on edge, and even Percy had to admit they needed rest before facing whatever came next. The motel they chose was cheap but clean. A single-story building on the outskirts of the city. Percy and Nico took one room, while Annabeth and Kira shared another, with Grover keeping watch from a position between the two. Unable to sleep despite his exhaustion, Percy stepped outside, leaning against the wall beside their room door. The night was unusually quiet. No traffic sounds, no distant sirens, not even the chirping of insects. The silence felt oppressive, as if the world were holding its breath. "Can't sleep either?" Nico asked, appearing beside him with the silent movement that always made Percy jump. "Gods, make some noise when you move," Percy complained, his hand automatically reaching for Riptide in his pocket. Nico shrugged unapologetically. "The shadows are restless tonight. They keep shifting." Percy glanced around the dimly lit parking lot. Now that Nico mentioned it, the shadows did seem unusually active, stretching and contracting in ways that didn't match the steady illumination of the motel's lights. "I could transform," Percy offered. "The shadow hunter form might help me see what's happening." "Save your energy," Nico advised. "It's not dangerous, just unsettled. Like the underworld before a major soul influx." "That's not ominous at all," Percy muttered. They stood in silence for a moment before Nico spoke again. "You know, I've been thinking about what Kira said about the transformations, how each one brings you closer to Deimos." "Yeah, the Shadow Hunter form. When you use it, do you feel different?" "Not just physically, but..." Nico hesitated, searching for the right words. "Like your personality shifts?" Percy considered the question carefully. "Sort of. Each form brings different instincts, different ways of seeing the world. The Water Sage feels most natural, closest to my normal self. The Earth Colossus is more aggressive, more focused on strength and durability. And the Shadow Hunter, colder," Percy admitted, "more calculating. I see connections, vulnerabilities, pathways others can't perceive. It's tempting to exploit them." Nico nodded as if this confirmed something. "Be careful with the next transformation, the Mind Weaver. If the pattern holds, it will push you even further from your core nature." "You sound worried," Percy observed. "I've seen what happens when people get too close to power that wasn't meant for them," Nico said quietly. "How it changes them, sometimes before they even realize it's happening." Before Percy could respond, a scream shattered the unnatural silence, coming from the direction of Annabeth and Kira's room. Both demigods sprinted toward the sound, Percy uncapping Riptide as he ran. They burst through the door to find Annabeth standing defensively over Kira, who lay on the floor clutching her head in obvious pain. The room itself seemed distorted, the walls bending inward at impossible angles, the air shimmering with energy. "What happened?" Percy demanded, rushing to Annabeth's side. "I don't know," she said, her voice tight with tension. "Kira was showing me something on her version of the chakra seal when she suddenly collapsed. Then, this started. The distortion was growing worse. Furniture beginning to warp and twist. Through the window, Percy could see similar effects spreading across the parking lot, reality itself seeming to bend and fold." Kira's eyes snapped open, glowing more intensely than before. "He's testing the boundaries," she gasped. "Deimos. He's pushing against the weakened areas, trying to break through. Here, now." Percy looked around in alarm. "Not physically," Kira clarified, struggling to sit up with Annabeth's help. "Just his influence, his awareness. The seal is damaged enough that he can reach out, manipulate reality in small ways." As if to demonstrate, the television in the corner turned on by itself, static filling the screen. Within the visual noise, a shape began to form. Vaguely humanoid but constantly shifting, composed more of suggestion than substance. "Percy Jackson," a voice emanated from the TV, though the speakers remained silent. The sound seemed to bypass their ears entirely, manifesting directly in their minds. "At last, we meet more directly." Percy stepped forward, positioning himself between his friends and the television. "Deimos, you're looking a little static. Why?" A sound like grinding stone filled their minds. Laughter. Percy realized with a chill. "Humor is deflection. How very human," Deimos said. "But I am not here for banter, Vessel. I am here to offer clarity." "I don't need your kind of clarity," Percy replied firmly. "But you do," Deimos insisted. "The Guardians lie. The traitor lies." The image in the static seemed to turn toward Kira. They tell you I seek destruction. Chaos. But what I truly offer is liberation. By destroying the boundaries between realms, Percy said skeptically. By removing artificial constraints, Deimos corrected. These boundaries were not natural, Vessel. They were imposed, a cosmic segregation to maintain power structures across realities. Don't listen, Kira warned, her voice strained. He twists truth with lies. The static image flickered violently. The Guardians fear what they cannot control, Vessel. They created the prisons between realms not to protect, but to preserve their dominion. If that's true, Annabeth challenged, why do you inspire such terror? Why is your very essence fear itself? The static coalesced more clearly, suggesting a face with too many eyes and a mouth that extended too wide. Because fear is clarity, daughter of Athena. Fear strips away pretense, reveals truth. In terror, all beings understand what truly matters. That's twisted, Nico commented, his hand on the hilt of his Stygian iron sword. Is it? Deimos countered. Consider what fear has taught each of you. What it has revealed about your true nature. The room temperature dropped precipitously. Percy felt a familiar sensation ebbing through his mind, the same cold touch he'd experienced in his dreams. Deimos was trying to access his thoughts, his memories. Get out of my head, Percy demanded, instinctively reaching for the chakra seal. Soon, you will understand. Vessel, Deimos continued, undeterred. When you access the Mindweaver transformation, when you perceive the patterns of thought that bind and separate consciousness across realms, you will see the truth of what the Guardians have done, what they continue to do. Enough, Kira shouted, activating her own chakra seal. Golden light surrounded her as she transformed, her appearance shifting to a form Percy hadn't seen before, clothed in shimmering gold armor with complex symbols that moved like liquid across its surface. She thrust her palm toward the television, golden energy streaming from her hand. The static image of Deimos distorted, then shattered, the TV screen going dark. Throughout the room, reality seemed to snap back into its proper shape, the distortions receding. We need to leave, Kira said urgently, her transformed voice melodic yet commanding. Now, he knows exactly where we are. They didn't argue, quickly gathering their belongings and rousing Grover, who had somehow slept through the entire encounter. Within minutes, they were in a taxi heading toward the bus station, leaving the motel behind. That was the Mindweaver transformation, wasn't it? Percy asked Kira, who had returned to her normal appearance but looked drained from the effort. She nodded. One version of it. Each vessel manifests the transformations slightly differently, based on their inherent nature and the realm they originate from. Deimos seemed very interested in me accessing that particular transformation, Percy noted. Because it will connect you more directly to his realm of influence, Kira explained. Terror exists primarily in the mind, in perception rather than physical reality. The Mindweaver transformation allows manipulation of those perceptions. He's trying to corrupt Percy, Annabeth realized. Use the transformation to influence his understanding of what's happening. Precisely, Kira confirmed, which is why we must be extremely careful with how and when you access it, Percy. Deimos will attempt to twist your perceptions, make you doubt everything you've been told. Including what you've told me? Percy asked directly. Kira met his gaze without flinching. Especially what I've told you. He knows I've defected from the Guardians, that I'm offering an alternative to their plan. He'll try to use that to create doubt, suggest hidden motives. Do you have hidden motives? Nico asked bluntly. Everyone has hidden depths to their motivation, Kira replied. But my primary goal remains the same, to stop Deimos without sacrificing Percy unnecessarily. The taxi pulled up to the bus station, and they climbed out into the pre-dawn darkness. As Percy paid the driver, he noticed the man's eyes flickering strangely, momentarily glowing before returning to normal. Did you see? Percy began once the taxi drove away. Yes, Annabeth cut him off. Deimos's influence is spreading. He can briefly affect mortals now, especially those who come in direct contact with us. We're leaving a trail of disruption wherever we go, Grover realized unhappily. Making it easier for both Deimos and the Guardians to track us. Then we need to move faster. Percy decided. No more overnight stops until we reach Camp Jupiter. They entered the bus station, purchasing tickets for the first bus to Indianapolis. As they waited in the nearly empty terminal, Percy couldn't shake the lingering sensation of Deimos's presence, a cold spot in his mind where the entity had tried to gain purchase. More disturbing was the realization that some of what Deimos had said resonated with doubts Percy already harbored. Were the Guardians truly protectors, or just another group trying to maintain control? Was Kira telling him everything, or did she have her own agenda? And most troubling of all, what would he discover when he finally accessed the Mindweaver transformation? What truths might be revealed that would change everything he thought he understood? The arrival of their bus interrupted these unsettling thoughts. As they boarded, Percy found himself studying each passenger carefully, looking for signs of dimensional disturbance or Deimos's influence. Everyone appeared normal, but after what he'd seen at the motel, appearances meant little. The bus pulled away from the station as the first light of dawn broke over Columbus. Percy stared out the window at the city, wondering how many of its inhabitants could sense the wrongness growing around them, the subtle weakening of reality's fabric as boundaries between realms continued to thin. Not for the first time, he questioned whether he was doing more harm than good by continuing this journey. Each transformation weakened the seal further, potentially accelerating the very crisis they were trying to prevent. But what alternative did they have? The Guardians wanted him dead, Deimos wanted him corrupted, and somewhere between those extremes lay Kira's dangerous plan. Percy touched the chakra seal on his wrist, feeling the power pulsing beneath his fingertips. 3 transformations mastered, 6 more awaiting activation. Each one a step closer to either salvation or catastrophe. And somewhere ahead, Mount Diablo waited, the heart of the seal, where all possibilities would converge. Indianapolis appeared on the horizon by mid-morning, its skyline hazy through the bus windows. They had encountered no further supernatural disturbances during the journey, though Percy had noticed increasing numbers of mortals with momentarily glowing eyes, brief flashes of awareness beyond their normal perception. The Roman escort should be waiting at the central bus terminal, Annabeth said, reviewing the instructions Frank had left them. From there, they'll take us to a secure location where we can access their transportation to Camp Jupiter. What kind of transportation? Grover asked nervously. Knowing the Romans, probably something efficient and uncomfortable, Percy guessed. As the bus approached the terminal, Percy noticed unusual cloud formations gathering above the city, swirling patterns that seemed to form and dissolve too quickly for natural weather. No one else on the bus appeared to notice, their gazes sliding past the anomaly as if it weren't there. The mist is working overtime, Nico commented, following Percy's gaze. But it's struggling to cover everything. The dimensional disturbances are becoming too pronounced for normal reality filters, Kira explained. Soon, even mortals will begin noticing, though they'll rationalize what they see into familiar contexts. Gas leaks, mass hallucinations, viral marketing campaigns, Annabeth listed. The usual explanations. The bus pulled into the terminal and the 5 questers disembarked, scanning the crowd for their Roman escorts. Percy spotted them immediately, 3 demigods in civilian clothes but with the unmistakable rigid posture of Legion training. The lead figure was a familiar face, Hazel Levesque, daughter of Pluto and Centurion of the 5th cohort. Hazel, Percy called, genuinely pleased to see his friend. She rushed forward to embrace him, then greeted the others warmly, even Kira. Though with understandable reserve, Frank sent me personally, Hazel explained as they moved through the terminal. Things have gotten complicated at Camp Jupiter. Complicated how? Annabeth asked. Hazel glanced around at the crowded terminal before responding in a lower voice. Political tensions. When news of Percy's new powers spread, the Senate split into factions. Some see it as an opportunity, others as a threat. Let me guess, Percy said dryly. The threat faction is winning. It's about evenly divided, Hazel admitted. Frank and Reyna are keeping things under control, but there's talk of containment protocols. They want to lock Percy up, Nico translated bluntly. Some do, Hazel confirmed. Mostly the older, more traditional senators. They're afraid of what the chakra seal represents, power outside their established order. Romans never did handle paradigm shifts well, Annabeth commented. They exited the terminal to find a nondescript van waiting at the curb. Hazel's 2 companions, introduced simply as Felix and Marcus, loaded their bags while keeping watchful eyes on their surroundings. We need to move quickly, Hazel said as they climbed into the vehicle. We're not the only ones looking for you in Indianapolis. Guardians? Percy asked. Some kind of advanced scouts, Hazel confirmed. They've been spotted around the city for the past 2 days. Watching transportation hubs. They're not attacking, just observing. Takeshi is being cautious, Kira noted. He knows I'm with you now, which complicates his approach. The van pulled away from the terminal, merging into mid-morning traffic. Percy noticed Felix taking an unnecessarily complex route, doubling back and making random turns to shake any potential pursuit. Where are we going, exactly? Percy asked after they'd been driving for nearly 20 minutes. Private airfield outside the city, Hazel replied. We have a plane waiting. A plane, Percy repeated uneasily. Flying had never been his favorite mode of transportation, given Zeus's general antipathy toward children of Poseidon. Don't worry, Hazel assured him. It's been specially arranged. Jupiter has granted safe passage in light of the current crisis. That's surprisingly reasonable of him, Percy said skeptically. The Olympians are concerned, Hazel explained. These dimensional disturbances are affecting their domains as well. Even Jupiter recognizes that some threats transcend old rivalries. As they drove through the outskirts of Indianapolis, Percy noticed more abnormalities in the surrounding landscape, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. Trees whose branches moved against the wind. Shadows that stretched in impossible directions. Birds flying in perfect geometric patterns. The boundaries are particularly thin here, Kira observed, her glowing eyes tracking the anomalies. Indianapolis sits at a convergence of ley lines. We've had reports of strange sightings across the city, Hazel confirmed. Mostly dismissed as hoaxes or hallucinations, but they're increasing daily. The van turned onto a private road leading to a small airfield where a sleek jet waited on the tarmac, its engines already running. Percy was surprised to see the sun symbol of Apollo emblazoned on its tail. Apollo's lending us his private jet? He asked incredulously. Not exactly lending, Hazel said with a small smile. More like, we're borrowing it with his children's help. The Apollo kids at Camp Jupiter convinced their father that assisting us was in his best interest. How did they manage that? Annabeth wondered. They wrote a prophecy-style poem suggesting terrible things would happen to his favorite karaoke bars if the dimensional barriers collapsed, Hazel explained, trying not to laugh. It wasn't technically a real prophecy, but Apollo apparently couldn't tell the difference. That's brilliant, Percy admitted. They transferred quickly from the van to the jet, the Roman escorts maintaining vigilant watch throughout the process. As Percy boarded, he felt a sudden pressure behind his eyes, a familiar cold touch trying to gain access to his thoughts. Deimos, reaching out again. Percy instinctively reinforced his mental barriers, pushing back against the intrusion. The pressure intensified momentarily, then receded, but not before Percy caught a glimpse of what seemed like amusement from the entity. Deimos wasn't truly trying to break through, he was testing, probing, learning Percy's defenses. You felt it too? Kira asked quietly as they took their seats. Percy nodded. He's getting stronger, isn't he? More able to reach across the boundaries. Yes, Kira confirmed grimly. And it will only increase as we travel west. The closer we get to Mount Diablo, the thinner the boundaries become. The jet began taxiing down the runway as Percy settled into his seat, trying to ignore both his unease about flying and the lingering cold spot in his mind where Deimos had touched. Beside him, Annabeth squeezed his hand reassuringly, somehow understanding both concerns without him voicing either. We'll be in California by afternoon, Hazel said as the jet lifted off. Camp Jupiter is prepared for your arrival, but I should warn you, there will be a formal Senate hearing to determine the official Roman response to the situation. Politics, Percy groaned. My favorite. It's necessary, Hazel insisted. We need the Senate's support to access Mount Diablo. The Legion has established a perimeter around the mountain due to increased dimensional activity there. Without official approval, we'd be fighting our own allies to reach the site. So I need to convince a group of paranoid Romans that I'm not going to destroy reality with my interdimensional powers, Percy summarized. Should be easy. Just be honest, Hazel advised. The truth has a weight that even the most skeptical senators can recognize. And if honesty doesn't work? Nico asked darkly. Hazel's expression grew more serious. Then we may have to consider alternative approaches to reaching the mountain. The implication was clear: they might need to defy the Senate if necessary. The fact that Hazel, a centurion and typically rule-abiding Roman, would even suggest such a thing demonstrated how serious she considered the situation. As the jet climbed to cruising altitude, Percy looked out the window at the landscape below. From this height, America looked normal, unchanged, no visible signs of the dimensional disturbances slowly unraveling reality. But he knew appearances were deceiving. The fabric between worlds was growing thinner by the hour, and soon not even the mist would be able to hide the truth from mortals. They were running out of time. The flight to California was mercifully uneventful. Though Percy remained tense throughout, expecting either divine turbulence from Zeus or another manifestation of Deimos's growing influence. Neither materialized, and by late afternoon they were descending toward a private airstrip outside San Francisco. The landscape below showed clear signs of dimensional instability even from the air, patches of land that seemed to shimmer and shift. Cloud formations that moved against prevailing winds, and what appeared to be localized weather phenomena confined to impossibly precise boundaries. "It's worse here," Grover said nervously. Peering out the window, "the nature spirits must be going crazy." "The entire Bay Area is a hot zone," Hazel confirmed. "Camp Jupiter has established safe corridors for travel, but even those require constant monitoring." The jet touched down smoothly and taxied to a stop near a small terminal building. Through the windows, Percy could see a Roman escort waiting, a full contubernium of 8 legionnaires in full armor. Led by Reyna herself, her purple praetors cape billowing in the breeze. "Formal welcome," Annabeth noted, eyebrows raised. "That's either a very good sign or a very bad one. With Romans, the line between honor guard and prison escort can be thin," Percy agreed. They disembarked into the late afternoon sunlight, which seemed somehow muted, as if filtered through an unseen barrier. Reyna stepped forward, her face composed in the careful neutral expression she reserved for official business. "Percy Jackson," she greeted with a formal nod. "On behalf of He 12th Legion Fulminata and the Senate of New Rome, I welcome you and your companions to Roman territory." "Praetor," Percy returned with equal formality. "We appreciate your hospitality in these unusual circumstances." A flicker of amusement crossed Reyna's face at his attempt at diplomatic language, but she maintained her official demeanor. "The Senate has convened an emergency session to hear your testimony regarding the interdimensional disturbances and your role in addressing them. They await our arrival." "No pressure," Percy muttered. Reyna leaned closer, dropping her voice so only Percy could hear. "The political situation is delicate, Percy. Tread carefully. Not everyone is convinced your presence helps more than it harms." "So I've heard," Percy replied quietly. "Any advice?" "Be respectful but firm," Reyna said, "and be prepared to demonstrate control over your new abilities. The Senate fears what it doesn't understand." They were escorted to a convoy of armored vehicles that would transport them to Camp Jupiter. Percy noticed the legionnaires eyeing Kira with particular suspicion, her glowing eyes and obviously non-human nature marking her as an unknown quantity. "Your guardian ally will be required to surrender any weapons before entering camp boundaries," Reyna informed them, nodding toward Kira. "I carry no conventional weapons," Kira replied evenly. "Only the chakra seal, which cannot be removed." "Then you will be under constant observation during your stay," Reyna decided. "Understood," Kira acknowledged without protest. As they drove toward Camp Jupiter, Percy was struck by how different the landscape appeared from his previous visits. The Caldecott Tunnel, which normally marked the entrance to the valley containing the camp, was now surrounded by shimmering air. As if heat waves were rising from the pavement despite the cool temperature. Inside the tunnel, the effect was even more pronounced. The walls seemed to flicker between solid concrete and something else entirely. Glimpses of other environments briefly visible before dissolving back into normalcy. "The tunnel intersects with a major ley line," Kira explained, noticing Percy's attention. "It's always been a thin spot between realms, which is why the Romans established their camp beyond it. But now it's barely holding together," Annabeth finished, watching as a section of wall briefly transformed into what looked like dense jungle before reverting to concrete. They emerged from the tunnel into the valley of Camp Jupiter, and Percy's concern deepened. The little Tiber, which normally flowed peacefully around the camp's boundaries, was behaving strangely, sections flowing backward, others forming perfect geometric patterns, still others rising into the air in defiance of gravity. Beyond the river, New Rome itself appeared mostly normal, but the camp portion showed signs of fortification beyond its usual defenses. Additional walls had been erected, and what looked like specialized energy generators were positioned at intervals around the perimeter, emitting faint golden light that seemed to stabilize the reality immediately surrounding them. Terminus helped design the reinforcements. Reyna explained, following Percy's gaze. We've been trying to stabilize our immediate environment while studying the disturbances. They crossed the Little Tiber via a ridge guarded by a full century of legionnaires. As Percy passed, he noticed many making subtle warding gestures, protection against evil, though whether directed at him specifically or the general situation, he couldn't tell. The convoy stopped at the Principia, the camp's headquarters. Frank Zhang waited on the steps, his expression brightening when he saw them. Despite the formal setting, he raced Percy warmly before greeting the others. Glad you made it safely, he said. The Senate is assembled in the forum. They're eager to hear from you. Eager to judge me, you mean, Percy corrected without rancor. Frank didn't deny it. They're scared, Percy. Everyone is. These disturbances are unlike anything we've faced before, beyond gods or titans or giants. Reality itself is becoming unreliable. Percy nodded in understanding. Lead the way. Let's get this over with. They were escorted to the forum, where the full Senate of New Rome had gathered, elderly retired legionnaires in formal togas, sitting in curved rows facing a central speaking platform. The space was packed with observers as well, current legionnaires, citizens of New Rome, and Lares, the ghostly ancestors who Lee drifted around the camp dispensing unwanted advice. Even the Lares looked unsettled, their transparent forms flickering more erratically than usual. At the front of the assembly sat the 10 senators who formed the ruling council, with a space in the center for the praetors. As Reyna and Frank took their places, Percy and his companions were directed to stand on the speaking platform. The Senate of New Rome recognizes Percy Jackson, son of Neptune in his Greek aspect, and his associates, announced an elderly senator, using the traditional Roman forms. You come before us in a time of crisis, bearing both information and, potentially, the source of our troubles. Percy stepped forward, trying to project confidence without arrogance. Senators of Rome, thank you for receiving us. The crisis we face affects all pantheons, all realms of existence. Greek and Roman must stand together, as we have before. A murmur ran through the assembly, not entirely negative, which Percy took as a good sign. The elderly senator who had spoken stood again. I am Lucius Verus, first senator of Rome. We understand you bear an artifact of unusual power, one that may be connected to the disturbances we have experienced. Percy held up his wrist, displaying the chakra seal. This device attached itself to me when I discovered an ancient scroll in an underwater cave near Camp Half-Blood. It allows me to transform, channeling power from different realms or aspects of reality. Show us, demanded another senator, a stern-faced woman with iron-gray hair. Percy glanced at Reyna, who gave a slight nod of permission. Taking a deep breath, Percy activated the water sage transformation, blue energy washing over him as he changed. A collective gasp rose from the assembly as they witnessed his skin take on the blue tinge. The wave-like markings appear around his eyes, and his clothing shift to the light blue and silver outfit with glowing symbols. This is the water sage form, Percy explained, his resonant voice carrying across the forum. It enhances my natural connection to water and allows me to perceive and manipulate it with greater precision. To demonstrate, he drew moisture from the air, forming it into the symbol of Rome, the eagle in SPQR, before letting it dissipate harmlessly. Impressive, Lucius Verus acknowledged. But our reports suggest you possess other transformations as well, some more concerning in nature. Percy allowed the water sage form to fade before activating the earth colossus. The green energy transformed him into the taller, broader form with stone-like skin and mountain markings. Murmurs of alarm spread through the Senate at this more dramatic change. The Earth Colossus, Percy explained, his thunderous voice causing some of the older senators to flinch. It grants strength, durability, and the ability to manipulate earth and stone. He demonstrated by touching the stone platform beneath his feet, causing a small section to rise and form a perfect miniature replica of the Roman Colosseum before returning it to its original state. And the third? Lucius pressed, his expression now more concerned. Percy hesitated. The Shadow Hunter transformation had proven the most alarming to observers in previous demonstrations. But honesty was essential here, showing the Romans he had nothing to hide. He allowed the Earth Colossus to fade and activated the Shadow Hunter form. The shadowy purple energy wrapping around him like a second skin. His appearance shifted to the pale, shadow-marked form with black clothing and subtle purple symbols. The reaction was immediate and negative. Several senators rose to their feet in alarm, and the Lares began wailing about shadow corruption and darkness beyond the underworld. Even Reyna and Frank looked unsettled, though they maintained their composure. The Shadow Hunter, Percy explained, his whisper voice somehow cutting through the growing commotion. It enables stealth, shadow manipulation, and the ability to perceive connections between things that normal vision can't detect. To demonstrate, perhaps unwisely, Percy stepped into a nearby shadow and reappeared from another across the forum, near the senators' seats. This caused several of the elderly Romans to scramble back in alarm. Enough, Lucius called, raising his hand for order. Return to the speaking platform, Percy Jackson. Percy complied, allowing the Shadow Hunter transformation to fade as he walked back. The forum gradually quieted, though the atmosphere remained tense. These powers, Lucius said when order had been restored, they are not Roman. Nor are they Greek. They come from outside our understanding of the divine order. Yes, Percy acknowledged. They draw from different mythological paradigms, different ways of understanding reality. And each time you use them, another senator interjected, you weaken the boundaries between these paradigms. Between these realms. That's correct, Percy confirmed, seeing no point in denial. But we have a plan to repair the damage and strengthen the boundaries permanently. He gestured for Kira to step forward, which she did with obvious reluctance, aware of the suspicion directed at her. This is Kira Mizuki, a dimensional guardian who has defected to help us, Percy introduced. She can explain the nature of the threat we face and how we intend to address it. For the next half hour, Kira outlined everything they had learned. About Deimos, the seal containing him, the Guardians, original plan to kill Percy and reclaim the Chakra seal, and her our native approach to reinforcing the seal through a ritual at Mount Diablo. Throughout her explanation, the senator's expressions ranged from skepticism to outright disbelief. When she finished, silence hung heavy over the forum. Finally, Lucius spoke again. You ask us to believe that a Greek terror god has evolved into an interdimensional threat, that the boundaries between mythological paradigms are collapsing. And that the solution is to send Percy Jackson, bearing an artifact that accelerates this collapse, to the very epicenter of the disturbances to perform a ritual designed by a self-confessed traitor to her own kind. Put that way, Percy had to admit their plan sounded insane. The evidence of dimensional instability is all around you, Annabeth pointed out, stepping forward. Whatever you choose to call the entity responsible, Deimos or something else, the threat is real and growing. And what guarantee do we have that this ritual will succeed? Demanded the stern-faced female senator. What if it accelerates the collapse instead of preventing it? There are no guarantees, Percy admitted. But doing nothing guarantees failure. The boundaries continue to weaken whether I use the transformations or not. My actions simply affect the rate of deterioration. Then perhaps the wisest course would be to contain you, suggested another senator. Place you in stasis until our own experts can determine a safer approach. A murmur of agreement ran through portions of the assembly. Percy tensed, ready to transform again if necessary to prevent being contained. Beside him, he felt his friends also preparing for potential conflict. Before the situation could escalate, Frank stood, his praetor's authority silencing the murmurs. Senators of Rome, he said firmly, I have fought alongside Percy Jackson against titans and giants. I have witnessed his loyalty and courage firsthand. If he believes this course of action represents our best hope, I am inclined to trust his judgment. As am I, Reyna added, rising to stand beside her fellow praetor. Moreover, our own augurs confirm that the disturbances are centered on Mount Diablo. Whatever the solution, it lies there. Pr. Preventing Percy Jackson from reaching that location would be counterproductive. The Senate chamber erupted into debate, senators arguing amongst themselves while Frank and Raina attempted to maintain order. Percy leaned closer to Annabeth. "This isn't going well," he murmured. "Actually, it's going exactly as expected," she replied. "Roman politics always looks like this. The real decisions happen behind the scenes." Indeed, Percy noticed Lucius Verus conferring quietly with several key senators, while Raina had stepped down to speak urgently with others. After several minutes of apparent chaos, Lucius raised his hand for silence. "The Senate will deliberate privately on this matter," he announced. "Percy Jackson and his companions will be provided appropriate quarters within New Rome while we consider our response. The Senate will reconvene at first light tomorrow for a final decision. And in the meantime, we're basically prisoners," Percy noted under his breath as they were escorted from the forum. "Honored guests under observation," Raina corrected, falling into step beside him. "It's the best compromise I could arrange. Half the Senate wanted you in chains." "Charming," Percy muttered. "Don't worry," Frank assured them, joining the group as they walked toward New Rome. "Raina and I have been working on the key senators for days. Most understand the severity of the situation, even if they don't fully trust the solution. And if they vote against us?" Annabeth asked directly. Frank and Raina exchanged a meaningful glance. "Then we have contingency plans," Raina said quietly. "But let's hope they won't be necessary." They were led to a guest house near the edge of New Rome, a comfortable villa with enough rooms for all of them, but with Roman guards stationed obviously at every entrance. "Rest," Raina advised as she prepared to leave. "Tomorrow will be challenging regardless of the Senate's decision." When the praetors had gone, Percy sank onto a couch in the villa's central atrium. Suddenly exhausted, the political maneuvering, combined with the demonstrations of his transformations, had drained him more than he realized. "That could have gone worse," Annabeth offered, sitting beside him. "It could have gone better too," Nico pointed out from where he stood by the window, watching the Roman guards outside. Hera remained standing, her glowing eyes fixed on some middle distance. "The boundaries are very thin here," she observed. "I can feel Demos's awareness pressing against them, seeking weaknesses." "Can he influence the senators?" Percy asked with sudden concern. "Push them toward the decision to contain me." "Possibly," Hera admitted. "His ability to affect minds increases as the boundaries weaken. Those already inclined toward fear or suspicion would be most vulnerable." "Great," Percy sighed. "So even if we convince the reasonable senators, Demos might sway the borderline ones." "Which means we need a contingency plan of our own," Annabeth decided. "In case the Senate votes against us, I can shadow travel us to Mount Diablo," Nico offered. "Not all at once, but in groups of 2 or 3. The mountain is heavily guarded," Grover reminded them. "The whole Legion has established a perimeter. And shadow traveling that close to the heart of the seal would be dangerous," Hera added. "The shadows there are, unpredictable. You might not emerge where, or when, you intend. So we need official approval," Percy concluded. "Or at least enough of a head start that we can reach the mountain before they can stop us." "I might be able to help with that," came a new voice from the doorway. They turned to see Hazel standing there, a determined expression on her face. "The guards let you in?" Annabeth asked in surprise. "I have certain privileges as a centurion," Hazel replied with a small smile. "And the guards are friends from my cohort." She entered the room fully, closing the door behind her. "Frank and Raina are doing everything they can to sway the Senate. But we should be prepared for either outcome. I've been studying the patrol schedules around Mount Diablo. There's a gap in coverage just before dawn, a 20-minute window where the night shift changes with the morning patrol. That's not much time," Percy noted. "It's all we have," Hazel said. "If the Senate votes against you, we'll need to move immediately. I can guide you through the patrol lines during that gap. And once we're past them?" Grover asked. "You're on your own," Hazel admitted. "The mountain itself is experiencing the worst disturbances. Most of the Legionnaires won't go above the base camp at the foothills." Percy looked around at his friends, reading determination in each face. Even in the worst-case scenario, they had options, dangerous ones, but options nonetheless. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," he said. "But thank you, Hazel. It's good to know we have friends here, regardless of what the Senate decides." Hazel nodded. Get some rest. I'll return before dawn with news of the Senate's deliberations, and to guide you to Mount Diablo, one way or another. After she left, Percy found himself unable to relax despite his exhaustion. He paced the atrium, the chakra seal on his wrist occasionally pulsing with energy as if responding to the proximity of Mount Diablo. You should practice accessing the Mind Weaver transformation, Kira suggested. Watching him pace. We don't know how much time we'll have tomorrow, and you'll need all 9 forms mastered before attempting the ritual. Percy hesitated. After Deimos's attempt to influence him through the television, he was wary of any transformation that might make him more vulnerable to the entity's manipulation. Is that wise? This close to the mountain, with Deimos's awareness so present? It's necessary, Kira said firmly. And better to attempt it now, with us here to help if something goes wrong, than to be forced to master it under pressure tomorrow. Percy looked to Annabeth, who nodded reluctantly. She's right. We should control the circumstances of your first attempt as much as possible. All right, Percy agreed. What do I do? Focus on the indigo symbol on the chakra seal, Kira instructed. But unlike the previous transformations, don't concentrate on external elements like water or earth or shadow. Instead, direct your awareness inward, to thought itself, to the patterns of consciousness. Percy closed his eyes, focusing on the chakra seal. He found the indigo symbol among the 9 and concentrated on it, turning his awareness inward as Kira had suggested. He tried to perceive his own thought patterns, the flow of consciousness that defined his mind. The symbol remained dormant, unresponsive to his efforts. I can't seem to access it, Percy admitted after several minutes of trying. You're overthinking it, Kira observed. The Mind Weaver isn't about analyzing thought, it's about experiencing it directly, recognizing the fundamental patterns that underlie all consciousness. That's abstract, Percy said in frustration. Try this, Annabeth suggested. Instead of trying to examine your own thoughts, open yourself to the thoughts around you. Feel the currents of consciousness in this room, not specific thoughts, but the energy of minds themselves. Percy tried again, this time extending his awareness outward while maintaining focus on the indigo symbol. He tried to sense the mental presence of his friends, Annabeth's sharp, analytical energy, Grover's nature-attuned consciousness, Nico's shadowed but intense focus, Ira's alien yet ordered thought patterns. For a moment, he felt something, a brief connection, as if he'd brushed against the edges of their minds. The indigo symbol flickered briefly, then faded again. Better, Kira encouraged, but you're still approaching it too intellectually. The Mind Weaver transformation isn't about understanding thoughts, it's about becoming one with the patterns of consciousness itself. Percy took a deep breath, trying a different approach. Instead of trying to analyze or perceive, he simply opened himself to the flow of mental energy around him, letting it wash through him rather than trying to grasp it. The indigo symbol began to glow steadily. Energy surged through Percy, different from the previous transformations, lighter, more ethereal, like a cool breeze out his mind rather than the physical rush of the other forms. When the transformation completed, Percy felt fundamentally changed, though in more subtle ways than the previous forms. His physical appearance had shifted less dramatically, his skin now with a slight indigo tinge, intricate circular markings around his eyes reminiscent of mandalas, his clothing transformed into flowing robes of deep blue and purple with constantly shifting symbols that seemed to respond to the thoughts of those around him. Most striking was the change in his perception. He could see not just the physical forms of his friends, but faint auras surrounding them, visual representations of their thought patterns and emotional states. Threads of connection linked them to each other, to him, and to more distant points beyond the villa walls. The Mind Weaver, Percy said, his voice now carrying a harmonic quality, as if multiple tones were layered within it. I can see everything. What do you perceive? Kira asked, studying him intently. Thoughts, connections, patterns. Percy struggled to articulate the overwhelming influx of information. I can see how minds connect to each other, how emotions flow between people, how ideas form and transform. He turned toward Annabeth, seeing not just her physical form but the brilliant complexity of her mind, layers of thought and emotion interacting in beautiful patterns. The connection between them was particularly strong, a golden thread that pulsed with shared experiences and emotions. It's incredible, Percy breathed. I can sense the Romans outside, their concerns and doubts. I can feel the minds of everyone in New Rome, each a unique pattern yet connected to the whole. Then Percy sensed something else, a cold presence at the edges of his awareness, watching him with keen interest. Deimos, his attention drawn by the activation of the Mind Weaver transformation. He knows, Percy said tensely. He can see me more clearly in this form. Block him out, Kira instructed urgently. Imagine barriers around your mind, walls that reflect his awareness rather than absorbing it. Percy tried to follow her guidance, visualizing protective barriers forming around his consciousness. The cold presence seemed to recede slightly but remained at the periphery, watching, waiting. I can keep him at bay, Percy said, but he's definitely aware of me. This form connects me more directly to his realm of influence. As expected, Kira said grimly. The Mind Weaver transformation bridges the gap between individual consciousness and collective awareness, the space where entities like Deimos operate. Percy explored the capabilities of the new transformation cautiously. He found he could project simple thoughts and images to those around him, not forcing them into others' minds, but offering them like suggestions that could be accepted or rejected. He demonstrated by sending Annabeth an image of Camp Half-Blood on a summer day, watching her smile as she recognized the scene. I received that, she confirmed. It felt like a memory appearing in my mind, but I knew it came from you. I can also perceive deception, Percy realized, turning toward the Roman guards outside. I can see when thoughts and words don't align. One of those guards is planning to report everything we say to Senator Verus directly, beyond his official duties. That's concerning, Grover said nervously. But useful to know, Nico added pragmatically. Percy continued exploring the transformation's abilities, finding he could create illusions by projecting mental images with enough force that they seemed to manifest in physical space. He demonstrated by creating an illusory butterfly that fluttered around the room, visible to everyone though it had no physical substance. Be careful, Kira warned as Percy experimented. The more actively you use these abilities, the more energy you draw across the boundaries, and the more attention you attract from Deimos. Percy nodded, dismissing the illusory butterfly. I think I understand the basics now. Should I try to access the next transformation as well? Kira shook her head. Not tonight. The Thunder, Beast and Fox spirit transformations will draw even more energy across the boundaries. Better to rest and preserve your strength for tomorrow. Percy allowed the Mind Weaver transformation to fade, returning to his normal appearance. As the ethereal energy dissipated, he felt strangely bereft, as if he'd lost access to a sense he hadn't known he possessed. More troubling was the lingering cold spot in his mind where Deimos's awareness had touched him. Even with the transformation ended, Percy could still feel the entity's attention, more focused than before. He's still watching, Percy said quietly. Even without the transformation active, the connection deepens with each new form you master, Kira explained. Particularly the Mind Weaver, which operates in a realm closer to Deimos's prison. Will I be able to block him out when I need to? Percy asked, concerned about the implications for the ritual ahead. With practice and focus, yes, Kira assured him. But it will become more challenging as you master additional transformations. The final forms, the Divine Sage, Sea Emperor, and Nine-Tailed Guardian, will bring you closest of all to his awareness. Great, Percy muttered, so by the time we reach Mount Diablo, I'll have a terror god with front row seats to my consciousness. Which is why we must act quickly, Kira emphasized. The longer Deimos has to study your mind, the better he can target his influence. Percy sat heavily on a nearby couch, suddenly exhausted from the transformation and the mental effort of blocking Deimos's presence. Annabeth joined him, her expression concerned. You should rest, she suggested. Tomorrow will be challenging enough without sleep deprivation. I'm not sure I can sleep with Deimos lurking at the edges of my mind, Percy admitted. I can help with that, Kira offered. She approached Percy and placed her fingertips gently on his temples. A temporary barrier. Not enough to sever his awareness completely, but sufficient to allow you to rest. Percy felt a subtle energy flowing from Kira's touch, creating a buffer between his consciousness and the cold presence of Deimos. The sensation of being watched receded to a barely perceptible whisper. Thank you, Percy said sincerely as Kira stepped back. Rest while you can, she advised. Tomorrow, we face either the Senate's judgment or a desperate race to Mount Diablo. Either way, you'll need your strength. As the others retired to their assigned rooms, Percy remained on the couch, Annabeth beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes before she spoke. 4 transformations down, 5 to go, she noted. How does it feel? Percy considered the question carefully. Powerful, exhilarating, terrifying. He looked down at the chakra seal, where F.R. symbols now glowed faintly before fading to dormancy. Each one changes me a little, expands my perspective but also pulls me further from myself. That's what concerns me, Annabeth admitted. The Percy I know has always been anchored by his core values: loyalty, courage, compassion. If these transformations start to erode that, they won't, Percy assured her, though a small part of him wondered if that was entirely true. I'm still me, just with additional perspectives. Annabeth studied his face, her gray eyes seemingly able to see through his reassurances. Just promise me something. If you start to feel yourself slipping, if Deimos's influence becomes too strong, tell me. Don't try to handle it alone. I promise, Percy said, meaning it. Whatever happened, whatever challenges the transformations brought, Annabeth remained his anchor to who he truly was. As they finally retired to their rooms for what remained of the night, Percy couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring a fundamental change, one way or another. Whether through the Senate's decision or their desperate race to Mount Diablo, the next phase of their journey would test not just his mastery of the transformations, but his ability to remain himself while wielding them. And somewhere beyond the thinning boundaries between realms, Deimos watched and waited, his influence growing stronger with each passing hour. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Convergence of Realms. Dawn painted Mount Diablo in shades of crimson and gold, but Percy didn't need the sunrise to see the wrongness of the mountain. Even from the villa in New Rome, miles distant, he could sense the distortions rippling across its slopes. The air around the peak shimmered like heat waves despite the morning chill, and occasional flashes of light, too geometric to be lightning, flickered near the summit. Percy stood on the villa's roof terrace, having slipped past the Roman guards while they changed shifts. The chakra seal on high's wrist pulsed in rhythm with the distant flashes, as if responding to some silent call. It's worse than yesterday, Hazel said, joining him at the railing. Percy wasn't surprised she'd found him. Daughter of Pluto had an uncanny sense for locating people. The boundaries are collapsing faster, he agreed. How much time do we have? Hazel's expression was grim. The augurs say less than 24 hours before catastrophic failure. After that, she left the sentence unfinished, but Percy understood the implication. After that, Deimos would be free, and the merging of realms would become irreversible. And the Senate? Percy asked, though Hazel's presence alone suggested the answer. Still deliberating, she confirmed. Reyna and Frank have been arguing your case all night, but the faction advocating containment has grown stronger. Deimos, Percy muttered. He's influencing them, playing on their fears. Probably, Hazel agreed. The more anxious senators have been having nightmares. Terrible visions of what might happen if you reach the heart of the seal. Percy turned from the mountain to face her directly. We can't wait for their decision, can we? Hazel shook her head. The patrol gap I mentioned starts in 30 minutes. If we're going to move, it has to be now. Let's get the others, Percy decided. They found Annabeth already awake and checking their supplies, with Nico and Grover groggily joining them in the atrium. Kira stood by the window, her glowing eyes fixed on Mount Diablo in the distance. The Senate is stalling, Percy informed them. We need to move now. I was afraid of this, Annabeth said, shouldering her backpack. Hazel, you're sure about this patrol gap? Hazel nodded. 30 minutes where we can slip through. After that, the entire mountainside will be covered again. What about the guards outside? Grover asked nervously. Hazel smiled. Already taken care of. Frank assigned friends from the 5th cohort to the morning watch. They'll look the other way. We should transform now, Kira advised Percy. Your water sage form will be least visible in the early light, and we'll need your enhanced senses to navigate the distortions around the mountain. Percy focused on the blue symbol of the water sage, the transformation washing over him smoothly after so much practice. His skin took on the blue tinge, wave-like markings appeared around his eyes. And his clothes shifted to the light blue and silver outfit with glowing symbols. "Ready," he said, his resonant voice carrying quiet authority. They slipped out through a side entrance where, as Hazel had promised, the guards studiously examined anything but the villa door. Moving quickly through the streets of New Rome, they reached the western boundary within minutes, where the distortions in reality became immediately more pronounced. Trees grew sideways before righting themselves. Stones in the path occasionally phased through solid matter. The air itself seemed to fold in places, creating brief glimpses of other landscapes, dense jungles, barren deserts, crystalline cities that defied physical laws. "Stay close," Percy warned, extending his water sage senses to navigate the distortions. "I can feel where the boundaries are thinnest. We need to avoid those spots. The Guardians will be watching the mountain," Kira cautioned. "Takeshi won't let us reach the heart without a fight. And Demos will be throwing everything he can at us," Annabeth added, her dagger already drawn. "The weaker the boundaries get, the more he can affect our reality." They moved swiftly through the foothills, Hazel guiding them along trails known only to the Legion's scouts. Twice they had to freeze in place as Roman patrols passed nearby, and once they detoured around Wa. T appeared to be a perfectly circular lake that hadn't existed the day before, its waters flowing upward into the sky. As they climbed higher, the distortions intensified. Gravity became unreliable. ROCKS would suddenly float upward before crashing down again. Temporal anomalies appeared as well, patches where time moved faster or slower than in the surrounding area. Through it all, Percy navigated, with the water sage's enhanced perception, feeling the ebb and flow of reality like currents in an ocean. "The patrol gap closes in 5 minutes, Hazel warned as they reached a ridge overlooking the main Roman encampment. Below them, legionnaires moved about in organized patterns, their golden armor gleaming in the morning light. Beyond the camp, the mountain proper began, and with it, the most severe distortions yet. "Once we're past the camp, I have to return," Hazel said reluctantly. "Frank and Reyna need plausible deniability about my involvement." "We understand," Percy assured her. "You've done more than enough. Just one last distraction," Hazel said with a mischievous smile. She closed her eyes in concentration, and suddenly dozens of precious gems erupted from the ground on the opposite side of the camp. The legionnaires turned toward the commotion, many running to investigate the supernatural phenomenon. "Now," Hazel urged. They sprinted across the exposed ground between the ridge and the mountain trail, Percy leading the way with his enhanced speed. Just as they reached the cover of the distorted treeline, shouts erupted from the camp. They'd been spotted. "Go," Hazel called, turning back toward the camp. "I'll delay them." Percy hesitated, unwilling to leave her to face the consequences alone, but Annabeth grabbed his arm. "She knows what she's doing. We have to keep moving." With a final nod of thanks to Hazel, Percy led the group up the mountain trail, pushing deeper into the zone of intense distortions. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit gradually faded, there because Hazel's distraction had worked or because the Romans were unwilling to venture too far into the reality anomalies. As they climbed higher, Percy felt a familiar cold presence growing stronger in his mind. Demos. His awareness now focused directly on them as they approached the heart of the seal. "He knows we're coming," Percy warned the others. "Of course he does," Kira replied grimly. "He's been waiting for this moment since you first activated the chakra seal." The trail ahead suddenly warped, stretching impossibly long before snapping back to normal dimensions. Trees alongside, the path flickered between their natural forms and twisted, skeletal versions of themselves. The very air seemed to thicken, becoming harder to move through. "Reality is breaking down more quickly now," Kira observed. "Our presence, particularly the chakra seal, is accelerating the process." "How much farther to the heart?" Percy asked, maintaining the water sage form despite the increasing drain. "The physical center is near the summit," Kira explained, "but the heart of the seal exists in multiple places simultaneously. We'll need to find the convergence point, where all realities overlap most completely." "And how do we find that?" Grover asked nervously. "Percy will sense it," Kira said with certainty. "The chakra seal will be drawn to its counterpart in the dimensional barrier." As if in response to her words, the seal on Percy's wrist pulsed more strongly, pulling him toward a narrow side path that veered away from the main trail. "This way," he said, following the insistent tugging of the device. The side path led them through increasingly bizarre terrain. Rocks that bled when touched. Plants that grew and withered in seconds. Patches of ground that became transparent, revealing other landscapes layered beneath their own. Throughout it all, the cold presence of Deimos grew stronger in Percy's mind, watching, waiting. They had climbed for perhaps an hour when the path opened into a small clearing unlike anything Percy had seen before. At its center stood what appeared to be a temple of some kind, or rather, multiple temples overlapping in the same space. From one angle, it resembled a Greek structure with Doric columns. From another, an Eastern pagoda with sweeping eaves. From yet another, a modernist building of glass and steel. The structures shifted and merged as they watched, never settling on a single form. The convergence point, Kira breathed. The heart of the seal. Percy stepped toward the impossible structure, the chakra seal now glowing intensely on his wrist. As he approached, he felt something else. A pull not just on the seal but on his consciousness itself, as if something were trying to draw him into the shifting temple. "Wait," Annabeth called, reaching for his arm. "Something's not right." Before she could elaborate, the air around them rippled violently. Reality itself seemed to tear open, and figures stepped through the resulting rifts, guardians, at least 20 of them. Led by a tall, imposing figure whose mask featured more elaborate markings than any they'd seen before. "Takeshi," Kira said, her voice tight with tension. The lead guardian removed his mask, revealing a stern face with glowing eyes similar to Kira's but colder, more unyielding. "Traitor," he acknowledged her before turning his attention to Percy. "Vessel, you have led us on quite a chase. We're here to repair the seal," Percy stated firmly. "Not break it." Takeshi's expression remained impassive. "A noble claim, but the path to catastrophe is paved with noble intentions. The vessel must be contained. The seal reclaimed." "You mean I must die?" Percy translated bluntly. "If necessary," Takeshi confirmed without emotion. "One life weighed against countless across multiple realms. The mathematics is simple." "There's another way," Kira insisted, stepping forward. "The ritual can strengthen the seal permanently without sacrificing Percy." "A theory," Takeshi dismissed. "Untested, unreliable, and ultimately irrelevant. The corruption has progressed too far." He gestured toward the shifting temple. "The convergence has begun. Even now, Deimos reaches through the weakened barriers." As if to confirm his words, the temple structure distorted more violently, and a dark mist began seeping from its constantly changing doors. The mist coalesced into a vaguely humanoid shape, the same shadowy figure from Percy's dreams, now partially materialized in their reality. "Vessel," the misty shape said, its voice like grinding stone. "You have come at last." "Deimos," Percy acknowledged, feeling the cold presence in his mind intensify to an almost painful degree. "The shadow stirs," Takeshi said grimly. "Guardians, contain the vessel." Now, the guardians moved as one, several transforming mid-step into elemental forms, fire, lightning, earth, and others Percy didn't recognize. Kira activated her own chakra seal, golden energy surrounding her as she transformed into her Mindweaver state. The glow of her eyes intensifying. "Percy, we need more power," Annabeth shouted, drawing her dagger as Nico summoned skeletons from the ground and Grover played a frantic tune on his reed pipes, causing nearby plants to entangle several guardians. Percy realized the water sage form wasn't enough for this battle. He allowed it to fade, immediately focusing on the Earth Colossus transformation. Green energy surged through him, leaving him in the taller, broader form with stone-like skin and mountain markings. As the first wave of guardians reached them, Percy slammed his fist into the ground, creating a shockwave that knocked several off balance. He followed with a sweeping motion that raised a wall of stone between his friends and another group of attackers. The battle erupted in chaotic intensity. Nico's skeletons grappled with guardians while Grover's nature magic created barriers of twisted vegetation. Annabeth fought with precision and skill, her invisibility cap allowing her to strike unexpectedly at vulnerable points. Kira engaged Takeshi directly, their similar Mindweaver powers creating spectacular displays of mental energy as they tried to overwhelm each other's perceptions. And through it all, the misty form of Deimos grew more substantial, feeding on the chaos and fear generated by the conflict. Percy fought his way toward the temple, instinctively knowing that the ritual needed to be performed at its center. A guardian wreathed in flames blocked his path, hurling fireballs that evaporated against Percy's stone-like skin. Percy countered by tearing a chunk of earth from the ground and hurling it with enough force to send the fire guardian flying backward. "Percy, behind you," Annabeth warned. Percy turned to see a guardian transformed into a lightning form, electricity crackling around its body as it prepared to strike. The Earth Colossus was strong but slow, vulnerable to such attacks. Percy needed something else, something faster. He allowed the Earth Colossus to fade and immediately focused on the Shadow Hunter transformation. The shadowy purple energy wrapped around him just as the Lightning Guardian unleashed its attack. The electricity passed harmlessly through Percy's now semi-corporeal form. "You can't hit what you can't touch," Percy said, his whisper voice somehow cutting through the din of battle. He stepped into a nearby shadow and emerged behind the Lightning Guardian, severing the connections that maintained its transformed state. The Guardian flickered and reverted to its base form, momentarily disoriented. Percy continued toward the temple, moving through shadow space to avoid direct confrontation where possible. He could sense the heart of the seal pulling him forward, the chakra say. Al on his wrist glowing more intensely with each step. "You cannot reach the heart alone, vessel," came Deimos's voice, both in Percy's mind and emanating from the misty figure that continued to grow more substantial. "You need all 9 transformations to perform the ritual. How many have you mastered?" 4. Barely half of what is required. Percy knew Deimos was right. The ritual Kira had described. It required the full power of all 9 transformations channeled simultaneously, something he couldn't yet achieve. He needed to master the remaining 5 forms quickly, but how? Each transformation took time to understand and control, and they were in the middle of a battle. As if sensing his dilemma, Kira disengaged from her fight with Takeshi long enough to call out, "The Thunder Beast, Percy. Convergence is strengthening electrical energy here, you can access it now." Percy followed her guidance, allowing the Shadow Hunter form to fade as he focused on a yellow symbol on the chakra seal that he hadn't previously activated. He concentrated on the concept of lightning, not just electricity but the raw power of a storm, the unstoppable force of a thunderbolt, the speed of energy moving through conductive paths. The yellow symbol responded, glowing brightly as energy surged through Percy. This transformation felt different, faster, more volatile, like capturing lightning in his veins. When it completed, Percy's appearance had changed dramatically, his skin now with a golden yellow tinge and jagged markings like lightning bolts extending from his eyes across his face. His clothing transformed into form-fitting armor of deep gold and black, with symbols that seemed to crackle with contained electricity. "The Thunder Beast," Percy said, his voice now carrying a static undertone that made the air around him vibrate. Electricity arced between his fingers as he experimentally raised his hand, and he could feel the electromagnetic fields of everything around him, the metal in Annabeth's dagger, the iron in his friend's blood, the subtle electrical impulses of their nervous systems. The Lightning Guardian, having recovered from its earlier disorientation, attacked again. This time, instead of avoiding the electricity, Percy caught it in his hand, absorbing the energy and redirecting it with amplified force. The Guardian was thrown backward by its own attack, crashing into 2 others. 5 transformations, Deimos noted, his misty form continuing to solidify. "Impressive progress, vessel, but still insufficient." Percy ignored the taunt, using the Thunder Beast's speed and electrical manipulation to clear a path toward the temple. He moved in bursts of near-instantaneous velocity, electricity propelling him forward faster than the eye could track. Guardians tried to intercept him but found themselves facing empty air as Percy darted past their defenses. He reached the edge of the temple clearing just as Takeshi broke free from his engagement with Kira, moving to block Percy's path to the heart. "Enough," the Guardian leader commanded, activating a transformation Percy hadn't seen before. Takeshi's form shifted, his body taking on a crystalline appearance had refracted light in dazzling patterns. "You will proceed no further, vessel." Percy launched a bolt of electricity from his palm, but it merely dispersed across Takeshi's crystalline surface, causing no damage. The Guardian leader countered with a gesture that sent crystal shards flying toward Percy like daggers. Even with the Thunder Beast's speed, Percy couldn't dodge them all, several slicing across his arms and chest. "Percy!" Annabeth shouted, trying to reach him but cut off by 3 guardians. Blood trickled from Percy's wounds, but the Thunder Beast form's accelerated healing was already closing them. He needed something else to counter Takeshi's crystal form, something that could match its versatility and precision. The fox spirit, Kira called, still engaged with multiple guardians. Enhanced senses, speed, agility, it can outmaneuver him. Percy allowed the Thunder Beast transformation to fade, immediately focusing on an orange symbol on the chakra seal. He concentrated on the concept of the fox, not just the animal but what it represented: cunning, adaptability, heightened awareness, the perfect balance of speed and precision. The orange symbol activated, glowing warmly as energy flowed through Percy. This transformation felt lighter, more agile, like his entire body had been perfectly tuned for movement. When it completed, Percy's appearance had shifted again, his skin now with a subtle orange-gold tinge and whisker-like markings on his cheeks. His clothing had transformed into a lightweight orange and black outfit that seemed to flow with his movements, and his senses had sharpened dramatically. "The fox spirit," Percy said, his voice now carrying a playful, almost musical quality. His perception of the world had changed completely. He could see in all directions simultaneously. Hear heartbeats from across the clearing, smell the distinct chemical signatures of each guardian's transformation. Takeshi launched another barrage of crystal shards, but this time Percy dodged them with supernatural grace, his body moving instinctively in the most efficient patterns possible. He counter-attacked not with brute force but with precision strikes against the resonance points in Takeshi's crystalline form, points that the fox spirit's enhanced senses could perceive as subtle vulnerabilities. Each strike caused Takeshi's form to vibrate discordantly, cracks appearing in the crystal surface. The Guardian leader retreated a step, genuinely surprised by the effectiveness of Percy's attack. 6 transformations, Deimos commented, his misty form now solid enough to affect the physical world. Tendrils of shadow extending from his core. "You learn quickly, vessel. But time grows short." Percy glanced toward the temple and saw that Deimos was right. The structure was becoming more unstable. Its shifting forms accelerating as reality continued to break down around it. The heart of the seal was destabilizing rapidly. "Annabeth," Percy called, his enhanced voice carrying across the battlefield. "We need to reach the temple. Now." She nodded in understanding, activating her invisibility cap and slipping past the guardians that had been containing her. Nico and Grover, seeing the plan, intensified their efforts to distract the remaining guardians. Percy engaged Takeshi directly, using the fox spirit's incredible speed and agility to keep the guardian leader occupied while Annabeth made her way to the temple entrance. Kira fought her way toward them as well, her Mindweaver abilities creating illusions that confused and disoriented several guardians at once. "The ritual requires all 9 transformations, Percy," Kira reminded him as she reached his side. "You must master the final 3 before entering the heart." "How?" Percy demanded, ducking a crystal blade that Takeshi had formed from his arm. "I need time to focus, to understand each form." "No," Kira corrected, deflecting an attack aimed at Percy with a shield of mental energy. "Why?" "I've been approaching them individually, but they're aspects of the same power. The Divine Sage, Sea Emperor, and 9-tailed Guardian are not separate. They're culminations of what you've already mastered." Percy considered her words while maintaining his defense against Takeshi. He had been treating each transformation as a distinct power to learn, but what if they were more connected? What if he remaining forms were evolutions of the ones he'd already mastered? "Cover me," he told Kira, allowing the fox spirit transformation to fade. She nodded, creating a dome of mental energy around them that temporarily held Takeshi at bay. "Hurry. The barrier won't last long." Percy closed his eyes, focusing inward. Instead of concentrating on a specific symbol on the chakra seal, he extended his awareness to all the remaining dormant symbols simultaneously, a white one, a deep blue one, and a crimson one at the center of the seal. Rather than trying to understand them individually, he sought connections between them and the 6 he had already mastered. The symbols began to respond, glowing faintly at first, then with increasing intensity. Percy felt knowledge flooding his mind. not just of individual powers but of their relationships, their harmonic resonances with each other. The white symbol represented the divine sage, the culmination of mental and spiritual energy. The deep blue symbol was the sea emperor, the ultimate expression of his natural affinity for water. And the crimson symbol at the center was the nine-tailed guardian, the unification of all other forms. Percy opened his eyes, now understanding what he needed to do. He focused first on the white symbol, drawing on the knowledge and awareness he had gained from the Mindweaver transformation but expanding it to a cosmic scale. The symbol activated fully, white energy surrounding Percy as he transformed. When the transformation completed, Percy stood taller, his body emanating a soft white glow. His skin had taken on a pearlescent quality with circular markings like galaxies around his eyes. His clothing had transformed into flowing white and silver robes with symbols representing universal constants, mathematical and physical laws that governed reality itself. The divine sage, Percy said, his voice now carrying a profound depth and clarity that seemed to resonate with the fabric of reality itself. His perception had expanded beyond the physical world to the patterns that defined existence, cause and effect, probability and certainty, the interconnected web of all things. With a gesture, Percy dispersed Kira's energy dome, no longer needing its protection. Takeshi attacked immediately, but Percy simply raised his hand, and time seemed to slow around the guardian leader. Not because Percy had altered time itself, but because he could perceive Takeshi's intentions before they manifested, reading the probability streams of the Guardian's actions. "You cannot win this fight, Takeshi," Percy said with absolute certainty. "I see all possible outcomes. In none of them do you prevent what must happen." Takeshi hesitated, momentarily unsettled by Percy's transformed state and the truth resonating in his words. That moment was all Percy needed. He gestured toward Annabeth, who had reached the temple entrance but was struggling against the chaotic energies surrounding it. "Go," he commanded, his voice carrying power that stabilized reality around her, creating a path of coherent space through the dimensional distortions. Annabeth nodded and slipped inside the temple, the shifting structure, momentarily settling into a form that allowed safe passage. Percy turned his attention back to Takeshi, who had recovered his resolve and was preparing another attack. But Percy could see it would be too late. He allowed the divine sage transformation to fade, immediately focusing on the deep blue symbol of the Sea Emperor. The transformation was instantaneous, blue energy of an intensity he had never experienced before washing over him. When it completed, Percy's appearance had shifted dramatically, his skin now a deep blue with markings like ocean currents flowing across his entire body. His clothing had transformed into armor that seemed formed from living water, constantly flowing yet maintaining its shape. A crown-like structure of coral and pearl adorned his head. "The Sea Emperor," Percy said, his voice now carrying the depth and power of the ocean itself, as if all the world's waters spoke through him. His connection to water had expanded to its ultimate expression, not just control or communication, but embodiment. He was no longer merely commanding water, he was water in human form. Percy raised his arms, and despite being nowhere near the ocean, water answered his call. It manifested not from existing sources but from the very fabric of reality, as if the concept of water itself were responding to him. A massive wave formed behind him, towering over the battlefield. "Enough," Percy commanded, and the wave crashed forward, not to harm but to separate, creating a perfect barrier between the guardians and the temple. The water moved with intelligent precision, engulfing some guardians while allowing Percy's friends to pass freely toward the temple entrance. "Percy," Grover called, running toward him with Nico close behind. "The temple, it's changing faster now." Percy looked and saw that the structure was indeed transforming more rapidly, its various forms blurring together as the boundaries between realities continued to deteriorate. Demos's manifestation had grown more substantial as well, now a fully formed figure of shadow and mist standing at the temple's threshold. "The final transformation," Kira urged, joining them at the water barrier. "The nine-tailed guardian, it's the only form powerful enough to complete the ritual." Percy nodded, allowing the Sea Emperor transformation to fade as he focused on the crimson symbol at the center of the chakra seal. This time, instead of concentrating on a specific concept or element, he opened himself to the totality of all 8 previous transformations, their powers, their perspectives, their fundamental natures unified in a single form. The crimson symbol blazed with blinding light, and energy unlike anything Percy had experienced before surged through him. This wasn't just a transformation, it was a transcendence. A harmonization of all aspects into a greater whole. When it completed, Percy stood transformed beyond recognition. His skin glowed with shifting patterns of all colors, the markings around his eyes a complex mandala incorporating elements from each previous form. His clothing had become a flowing battle garment of crimson and gold, with 9 distinct symbols arranged in a circle across its back. Most striking of all were the 9 tails of pure energy extending from behind him, each a different color corresponding to one of the transformations, flowing and moving with apparent consciousness of their own. The 9-tailed guardian, Percy said, his voice now a harmonic chorus that contained elements of all previous voices. Power radiated from him in waves, stabilizing the chaotic reality in his immediate vicinity. Takeshi and the other guardians fell back, even their disciplined resolve shaken by the sight of the complete transformation. Only Deimos seemed unaffected, his shadowy form actually growing larger as if feeding on the energy Percy now emanated. At last, the entity said, its voice echoing across multiple planes of existence simultaneously. The vessel is complete, Percy. Annabeth called from the temple entrance. We need to perform the ritual now. Reality is collapsing. She was right. Despite the stabilizing effect of Percy's transformation, the world around them continued to deteriorate. The sky above had split open, revealing glimpses of other realms, some recognizable, others utterly alien. The ground beneath them rippled like water, tions from different realities briefly superimposing over their own before vanishing again. Come, Percy said to his friends, his voice resonating with power. The heart awaits. Kira, Annabeth, Grover, and Nico gathered around him. And together they approached the temple entrance. Deimos made no move to stop them, his shadowy form simply watching with what might have been anticipation. He wants us to enter, Annabeth realized. Clutching Percy's arm. Why isn't he trying to stop us? Because he believes he's already won, Kira said grimly. The boundaries are so weak now that the rituals LD go either way, strengthening the seal or shattering it completely. Then we make sure it goes our way, Percy stated, his multi-toned voice resolute. They stepped through the entrance, and reality shifted around them. The interior of the temple was impossible, larger than its exterior, with architecture that defied physics. Columns rose to support ceilings that weren't there, stairways led to platforms that existed in multiple places simultaneously, and at the center stood a dais with 9 pillars arranged in a circle. The heart of the seal, Kira breathed. Where all realms converge. Percy approached the dais, feeling the 9 tails of energy behind him responding to the pillars, each drawn to one that matched its color and essence. The chakra seal on his wrist now blazed with light so intense it was visible through his transformed skin. What do I do? Percy asked, feeling the urgency of their situation. Outside the temple, reality continued to collapse, and Deimos's presence grew stronger by the second. Channel the energy of all 9 transformations into the pillars, Kira instructed. They'll stabilize the seal from multiple realms simultaneously. But be careful, Deimos will try to corrupt the process. Turn your energy toward breaking the seal rather than reinforcing it. As if summoned by her warning, Deimos's shadowy form materialized fully within the temple, now a whirring figure of darkness with countless eyes that shifted positions across its amorphous body. The vessel is mine, Deimos declared, his voice shaking the very foundations of the temple. The convergence cannot be stopped. We'll see about that, Percy replied, stepping onto the dais. He raised his arms, directing the 9 tails of energy toward the corresponding pillars. Each tail connected with its pillar, creating circuits of power that began to illuminate complex patterns on the floor, a massive seal design that hadn't been visible before. Yes, Deimos said, his form growing larger. Channel the power, vessel. Break the barriers between worlds. Percy felt the entity's influence pressing against his mind, trying to twist his intentions, redirect the energy he was channeling. The call, presence he had felt since first activating the chakra seal now threatened to overwhelm him, seeping into the connections between him and the pillars. Percy, Annabeth called, seeing his struggle. Remember who you are. Don't let him in. Percy tried to focus, to maintain his purpose against Deimos's influence, but the entity's power was immense, the accumulated terror of countless beings across multiple realities. Concentrated into a single will, Percy felt his control slipping, the energy he channeled beginning to destabilize the seal rather than reinforce it. Your friends cannot help you now, Vessel, Deimos said, almost gently. Their minds are too limited, too confined to single-realm thinking. But you who have experienced 9 perspectives, 9 ways of understanding reality, you know better. The boundaries are artificial, unnecessary. Together, we can create something new, something greater. Percy found himself almost agreeing, the perspectives granted by the 9 transfo are machines allowing him to see the logic in Deimos's words. Why maintain artificial separations between realms? Why not allow all possibilities to exist simultaneously? Because chaos isn't freedom, came Annabeth's voice, cutting through his thoughts. She had moved closer to the dais, her gray eyes fixed on his. Structure gives meaning to existence, Percy. Without boundaries, without definition, here is no identity, only formless potential. Her words resonated with something deep within Percy, the core of who he was beneath all the transformations. A son of Poseidon, a Greek demigod, a hero defined not by limitless potential but by specific choices, specific loyalties, specific loves. She speaks truth, Kira added, joining Annabeth. I've seen realms where boundaries failed, Percy. Nothing. Survived as itself. All identity dissolved into chaos. Percy looked at his friends, Annabeth with her unwavering confidence in him, Grover with his nervous courage, Nico with his understanding of shadows balanced by light, and Kira with her belief in protection that preserved rather than constrained. They grounded him, reminded him of why boundaries mattered. No, Percy said to Deimos, reasserting control over the energy he channeled. The convergence ends here. With renewed focus, Percy directed the power of all 9 transformations into the pillars, but now with the clear intention of reinforcing the seal rather than breaking it. The patterns on the floor blazed with light, and the entire temple structure began to stabilize, its shifting forms settling into a harmonious whole that incorporated elements from multiple architectural traditions without chaos. You cannot stop what has begun. Deimos raged, his shadowy form lunging toward Percy. The vessel is mine. I'm nobody's vessel but my own, Percy declared, his 9-voiced harmony ringing with absolute conviction. The energy flowing through the pillars intensified, forming a dome of light that expanded outward from the dais. Where it touched Deimos's shadowy substance, the entity recoiled, his form beginning to dissolve at the edges. No, Deimos howled, a sound of primal terror that shook the temple to its foundations. I will not return to imprisonment. Not again. You don't have a choice, Percy stated, channeling more power into the seal. The dome of light continued to expand, pushing Deimos's form back toward a dark rift that had appeared behind him, a glimpse of his prison dimension. But the entity fought with the desperation of one facing eternal confinement. Tendrils of shadow lashed out, wrapping around Percy's arms, trying to disrupt his connection to the pillars. The cold presence in Percy's mind intensified to an almost unbearable degree as Deimos focused all his influence on corrupting Percy's purpose. If I return to prison, Vessel, you come with me, Deimos threatened. The ritual demands balance. Someone must maintain the seal from within. Percy felt the truth in these words. The ritual was creating a new equilibrium. But it required an anchor, a consciousness to stabilize the seal from the prison side. Either Deimos would be fully contained, or Percy would be drawn in with him, becoming the new prisoner between realms. Percy, no, Annabeth cried, realizing the choice before him. She tried to reach the dais but was held back by the intensifying energy field. Percy looked at her, at all his friends, feeling a profound calm despite the momentous decision before him. It's okay, he said, his multi-voiced harmony somehow gentle despite its power. This is how it has to be. There must be another way, Annabeth insisted, tears streaming down her face. There is, came Kira's voice, unexpectedly resolute. She stepped forward, approaching the energy dome. The anchor doesn't have to be Percy. Before anyone could stop her, Kira activated her own chakra seal, transforming into a brilliantly golden version of the 9-tailed guardian. Her form mirrored Percy's but with subtle differences reflecting her own nature. What are you doing? Percy demanded, maintaining his connection to the pillars despite Deimos's continuing assault. What I should have done long ago, Kira replied, her own harmonic voice filled with purpose. The Guardians were formed to maintain the seal, not just guard it from outside. One of us must remain within, ensuring balance from the other side. Kira. No, Percy began. But she cut him off. I've watched too many vessels sacrifice themselves, she said firmly. Not this time. This is my choice, Percy Jackson. My redemption. With those words, Kira thrust her hands into the energy dome, connecting herself to the seal pattern. The effect was immediate. The energy flowed through her as well as Percy, creating a dual anchor that balanced the seal from both sides. Deimos howled again as the equilibrium shifted, his form being inexorably drawn back toward the prison dimension. This changes nothing, he raged. The boundaries will weaken again. I will return. Not in any lifetime you'll recognize, Kira countered, her golden form beginning to shimmer as she allowed herself to be pulled toward the rift alongside Deimos. I'll be waiting. Percy wanted to stop her, to find another solution, but he could feel through the connected energy that her decision was the right one, the necessary balance to complete the ritual properly. One anchor in the mortal world, one in the prison dimension, maintaining the seal from both sides. Thank you, he said to her, pouring gratitude into the harmonic resonance of his voice. Kira smiled, her glowing eyes peaceful despite her fate. Live well, Percy Jackson. Remember all 9 perspectives, but never lose sight of who you truly are. With a final surge of power, the ritual reached completion. The dome of energy expanded to encompass the entire temple, then beyond, stabilizing reality as it spread outward. Deimos's shadowy form was compressed, contained, and drawn fully into the rift. Kira, maintaining her golden 9-tailed guardian form, followed willingly, a serene expression on her face as the rift closed behind them. The temple shuddered one final time, then settled into a single, stable form, a harmonious blend of all its previous iterations. The pillars continued to glow softly, maintaining their connection to Percy through the 9 tails of energy, but the desperate urgency had passed. The seal was repaired, reinforced, and now properly anchored on both sides. Slowly, the energy of the 9-tailed guardian transformation began to fade from Percy, the tails of light reader, acting one by one as the pillars accepted their power. When the last tail disappeared, Percy stood in his normal form once again, the chakra seal on his wrist now dormant, its symbols visible but no longer glowing. Is it over? Grover asked tentatively, approaching the dais where Percy stood. Percy nodded, feeling the absence of Deimos's cold presence in his mind for the first time since touching the scroll. The seal is restored. Kira is maintaining it from within. She sacrificed herself, Nico said quietly. For all of us. For all realms, Percy corrected, stepping down from the dais. She found her purpose. Annabeth rushed forward, embracing him tightly. I thought I was going to lose you, she whispered against his chest. Percy held her close, feeling the simple joy of being himself again, no transformations. No multiple perspectives clouding his identity. Just Percy Jackson, son of Poseidon, holding the woman he loved. Let's go home, he said softly. They exited the temple, to find the mountain restored to normal. No reality distortions, no dimensional anomalies. The sky above was clear blue, and the landscape stretched out below in peaceful normality. Even more surprise was what awaited them outside the temple entrance. Takeshi stood there, mask removed, with the remaining guardians arrayed behind him. But their posture had changed. No longer aggressive but respectful, almost reverent. The seal is restored, Takeshi stated, studying Percy with newfound consideration. More strongly than before. Thanks to Kira, Percy replied pointedly. Takeshi inclined his head, acknowledging the rebuke in Percy's tone. She made her choice. A guardian's choice, in the end. What happens now? Annabeth asked cautiously. Now, we return to our purpose, Takeshi replied. Monitoring the boundaries, preventing incursions. The damage has been repaired, but vigilance must be maintained. He approached Percy, stopping at a respectful distance. The chakra seal remains bound to you, vessel, Percy Jackson. But it is dormant now, its power at rest unless deliberately awakened. And if I were to awaken it? Percy asked, touching the device on his wrist. You could, Takeshi acknowledged. The knowledge of all 9 transformations remains within you. But each use would draw energy across boundaries that are now stable. Small activations would cause no harm, but extensive use would weaken the seal again. Percy finished for him. I understand. Takeshi studied him for a moment longer, then made a formal gesture of respect, a slight bow with his right fist pressed against his left palm. You have earned the right to bear the seal, Percy Jackson. Use its wisdom well, its power sparingly. With those words, Takeshi and the other guardians began to fade from view, returning to whatever dimension they called home. Before he disappeared completely, Takeshi spoke one final time. Hira sends a message, he said, his voice growing distant. She says, 9 perspectives, 1 heart. Remember. Then they were gone, leaving Percy and his friends alone on the mountainside with the temple, now a permanent, physical structure that incorporated elements of Greek, Roman, and Eastern architecture in perfect harmony. So, Grover said after a moment of silence, does this mean we don't have to worry about reality collapsing anymore? Percy smiled, feeling lighter than he had in days. Not today, at least. What about the Romans? Nico asked, gesturing down the mountain where they could see legionnaires beginning to climb the trails toward them. I'm guessing EY noticed when reality stopped trying to tear itself apart. I'll handle them, Percy said confidently. After facing Deimos and interdimensional guardians, Roman politics seemed remarkably straightforward. As they began their descent to meet the approaching legionnaires, Percy felt Annabeth's hand slip into his. He squeezed it gently, grateful for her steady presence throughout the entire ordeal. 9 perspectives, 1 heart. She quoted thoughtfully. What do you think Kira meant? Percy considered the question, looking down at the dormant chakra seal on his wrist. I think she meant that seeing the world from multiple angles doesn't have to change who you are at your core. That understanding different perspectives can make you wiser without losing your identity. Sounds like something worth remembering, Annabeth agreed. Percy nodded, feeling the weight of the lesson, and the responsibility of the dormant power he still carried. The chakra seal remained, a reminder of wider real it, wise and a potential resource in future crises. But for now, it was enough to be Percy Jackson again, walking down a mountain with his friends, facing whatever came next together. 9 perspectives, 1 heart. The adventure might be over, but its meaning would remain with him always. In the days that followed, Percy and his friends were welcomed as heroes by both Camp Jupiter and Camp Half-Blood. The Senate, embarrassed by their hesitation, retroactively approved the mission to Mount Diablo, claiming they had always intended to support Percy's plan. Reyna and Frank knew better but played along for the sake of political harmony. The temple on Mount Diablo became a joint Greek-Roman sanctuary, a neutral ground where demigods from both camps could meet and study the harmonious blending of their traditions. Scholars from the Athena cabin worked with Rome's best architects to document the unique structure, though many of its properties remained mysterious. Reality stabilized completely, the dimensional disturbances fading like a receding tide. Occasional anomalies still occurred near the temple, brief glimpses of other realms, patches where physics behaved slightly differently, but they were contained and predictable. Causing no harm, Percy returned to Camp Half-Blood with the chakra seal still attached to his wrist but dormant. Chiron examined it carefully, confirming Takeshi's assessment that it could be activated if necessary but should remain at rest whenever possible. A remarkable artifact, the centaur observed. And a remarkable responsibility. Story of my life, Percy replied with a wry smile. He experimented cautiously in the following weeks, briefly accessing individual transformations under controlled conditions. The water sage came most easily, naturally aligning with his Poseidon heritage. The others required more focus but remained accessible. Only the 9-tailed guardian form remained beyond reach, requiring all previous transformations to be active simultaneously. A level of energy expenditure that would risk destabilizing Kira's careful maintenance of the seal. As summer turned to fall, life at camp returned to something resembling normal. Percy and Annabeth made plans for college, determined to pursue their future together despite the new complexity Percy carried with him. On their last night before departing for New Rome's University, they sat on the beach at Camp Half-Blood, watching the moonlight play across the sound. The chakra seal on Percy's wrist occasionally caught the light, its 9 symbols visible but quiet. "Do you ever miss it?" Annabeth asked, leaning against his shoulder. "The transformations, the power." Percy considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Each form showed me the world differently. The water sage's connection to all living things. The earth colossus's understanding of strength and foundation. The shadow hunter's perception of hidden connections." He paused, remembering. The mind W. Ever's insight into thoughts and patterns. The fox spirit's perfect awareness of surroundings. The thunder beast's sense of pure energy. And the last 3, Annabeth prompted. The divine sage's vision of cosmic order. Percy continued more softly. The sea emperor's embodiment of my father's domain. And the 9-tailed guardian, seeing everything at once, from all perspectives simultaneously. He fell silent, feeling the echo of that ultimate awareness, the brief moment when he had perceived reality from 9 different angles at once, understanding the necessity of both boundaries and connections. "But I don't need transformations to remember what they taught me," Percy said finally. 9 perspectives, 1 heart. I carry that with me now. Annabeth smiled, taking his hand in hers. "That's what makes you Percy Jackson. Powers or no powers." Percy looked out at the sea, feeling its familiar pull, his first and most fundamental connection. The chakra seal might remain with him forever, a reminder of wider realities and different ways of seeing. But his core identity, the heart that Kira had reminded him to preserve, remained unchanged. Son of Poseidon, hero of Olympus, and now, quietly, guardian of a seal that preserved the boundaries between realms. Just another responsibility in a life that had never been ordinary. But as he sat beside Annabeth, watching the moonlight on the waves, Percy found he wouldn't have it any other way. 9 perspectives had shown him different visions of reality, but 1 heart had guided him home. That was enough. That would always be enough. Chapter 3 end.